Welcome to ComicLingo. Watch, listen, read, and feel English naturally through manga-style dialogue and engaging storytelling. Today, let's dive into a recently popular novel, Surviving as the Tyrant's Chef, Chapter 21-30. Chapter 21, The Queen, 2. Sukyeong Mama, please take back your words. Head chef John trembled violently, prostrating himself on the floor in haste. A poison hand? Didn't that imply an attempt to assassinate the queen using food? A single misstep could lead to being branded a traitor, resulting in the extermination of his entire clan, a truly perilous situation. Won't that become clear as we investigate? Naksu retorted even more sharply, turning the faces of everyone in the royal kitchen a ghastly pale. Just then. Isn't there something else that needs to be investigated? The one who suddenly interjected was the only person there voicing her opinion. It was Ji Young. I heard it myself yesterday when the table was set for His Majesty at Chihongwon. Wasn't it Sukyeong Mama who said that the food reminded her of the queen? At Ji Young's clear enunciation, Naksu's crescent moon-like eyebrows arched sharply. Ho, so you're saying that the queen received that food because of me? Are you implying that the queen's sudden illness is my responsibility? Is that really what you want to say, you little thing? Isn't it Sukyeong Mama who was trying to place blame on someone? How audacious. Very well, let's investigate. If there's a problem with the food and someone falls ill, who is responsible, the person who ordered the food or the person who made it? Naturally, it would be the person who made the food. As if a cat cornering a mouse, Naksu's logic was meticulous and cold. However, Ji Young did not cower and resolutely responded. No. It depends on what kind of food was served to whom. You dare to talk back until the end. If that's the case, then we must investigate even more thoroughly. What are you all doing? Take this wench to the Royal Investigation Bureau immediately. We will open an immediate inquiry to determine the truth. As Jang Naksu's stern command fell, the royal guards moved in a flurry, as if receiving a royal decree. Such power was unimaginable for a concubine of the inner court, a rank 3. As she glared at the sight of the red rope binding Ji Young's shoulders, Naksu spat out in an icy cold voice. I will inform His Majesty and request a personal interrogation. At the same time, Jang Jiam, a trainee kitchen maid in the royal kitchen, was moving quickly with hurried steps. She constantly looked around, as if afraid someone was chasing her. As she rounded a corner along the wall towards the queen's residence, a man's arm suddenly shot out and pulled Jang Jiam away. Hook! Shoo! The man put a finger to Jang Jiam's lips, who was about to scream. Did anyone see you coming here? When Jang Jiam shook her head, the man asked urgently. What's the situation? It seems like the interrogation of the royal cuisine master is about to begin. We must keep a close watch to ensure that nothing leaks out. Wearing a military uniform, with piercing eyes and thick eyebrows. Jang Jiam had seen this man before. The man in the navy robe who had been following the court ladies in the marketplace. Signal me when the interrogation begins. Remember, not a single detail must go awry. Jang Jiam nodded, deeply nervous. And before she could add anything, the man disappeared into the shadows of the wall. Kakudunji Oriari. That was the common name for the uniforms of the Royal Investigation Bureau guards. The name came from the fact that the pointed conical hat and the checkered pattern of white stripes on their jackets resembled a magpie at first glance. However, one should not be deceived by the seemingly cute name. There were countless cases of people fainting at the mere sight of a kakudunji ori. To the criminals being interrogated, a kakudunji ori-clad guard was no different from a grim reaper from hell. Especially an interrogation conducted here at the Royal Investigation Bureau. Since the Royal Investigation Bureau mainly dealt with serious crimes such as treason, the interrogation was almost always accompanied by cruel torture. Severing the tendons of the ankles, dangun, crushing the kneecaps, apsol, branding the flesh with hot iron, nakyung, etc. Once the interrogation began, it was common for people to die from shock midway, and even if they were acquitted, it was common for them to be left with a disability due to the aftereffects of the torture. Therefore, the terrifying instruments of torture prepared by the Royal Investigation Bureau had the amazing power to make people confess to crimes they didn't even commit, just by looking at them. So it was only natural that Ji Young's whole body trembled as soon as she saw those brutal torture devices. I need to keep my wits about me from now on. Moreover, Jang Nok-soo was determined to kill her in this situation. No matter how righteous and innocent Ji Young was, she couldn't help but be afraid. Whether they knew her inner thoughts or not, the expressionless guards began to tightly bind Ji Young's arms, legs, and shoulders to the torture rack with rope. Aren't you tying it too tight? It hurts. The Royal Investigation Bureau guards wearing kakadunji ori wouldn't even bat an eye at such a trivial complaint. Under the torches burning fiercely on both sides from early evening, gruesome torture devices were soon being set up. The infamous Royal Investigation Bureau interrogation was about to begin. Ji Young took a deep breath to sharpen her mind. If things go wrong even a little bit, I'm really in big trouble. Soon, the royal investigator in charge of the interrogation and the royal secretaries to record the events began to enter, and among them, Do Sungjiam Sungjae and Sukyeong Jang Nok-soo were also seen entering. When Jang Nok-soo's eyes met Ji Young's from afar, a strange smile flickered across her face. Clear malice. Rather, that sight aroused a strange fighting spirit deep within Ji Young's heart. At that moment, a clear voice echoed loudly. His Majesty has arrived. Everyone turned their heads towards the sound, and there, the red dragon robe with golden dragon patterns embroidered on it was walking in. Yeonsan-gun himself had come to the Royal Investigation Bureau to conduct the personal interrogation. The king really stepped in himself. If that psycho gets involved, there's no telling where things will go. Yeonsan-gun, who strode towards Ji Young, who was trembling with anxiety, suddenly thrust his face close to hers. Is it true that you tried to use poison on the queen through food? His icy cold eyes were filled with a complex mixture of anger, disappointment, and various other emotions. That can't be. I only served it so that His Majesty could share the same food with the queen. Didn't the queen have a sudden illness because of that food? No. There's no way she could have fallen ill after eating what I served. Before Ji Young could finish her answer, Nok-soo's shrill voice pierced through like an awl. Silence. After eating the food you served, the queen suffered from bleeding and acute gastroenteritis last night, and even lost the child she was carrying. How dare you utter such outrageous words after committing such a grave crime? As soon as she heard those words, Ji Young felt like her head was spinning. She knew for sure. This was an elaborately designed scheme. A work in which Nok-soo's demonic genius was displayed without fail. The moment she tasted the tiramisu for the first time, two important pieces of information flashed through her mind like lightning. One was that the main ingredient in the cake was flour. And the other was that the queen had a peculiar constitution that caused an extreme allergic reaction to flour. For Jang Nok-soo, who controlled the court ladies scattered throughout the palace, obtaining that much information was a simple matter. So, by having tiramisu made with flour served to the queen, she could miscarry the queen's unborn child, who was like a thorn in her side, and at the same time, have an excuse to punish the person who made the food. It was like killing two birds with one stone without getting her own hands dirty. It was truly a case of killing with a borrowed knife for both sides, so there was nothing better for Nok-soo. To come up with such a terrible plan in that short moment after eating the tiramisu, she really is a terrifying woman. Ji Young felt cold sweat running down her spine. But she couldn't just stand by and be defeated. Ji Young opened her mouth towards Yeonsan-gun, speaking clearly. As His Majesty has heard, it was Sukyeong Mama who said that the food reminded her of the Queen last night. That is certainly true. But Sukyeong did not know about the Queen's peculiar constitution when she said that. How could Sukyeong have known what even I did not know? Ji Young seized the opportunity and countered Yeonsangun's reply. Your Majesty, are you saying that it is not a crime if one did not know about the Queen's constitution? Then isn't that the same for me? Traces of contemplation began to appear on Yeonsangun's face at those words. It was a valid point. There was no way this child, who had been appointed as the royal cuisine master only recently, could have known about the Queen's constitution. Besides, it wasn't originally Ji Young's job to serve the Queen's meals at the Queen's residence. Now that he thought about it slowly, wasn't this whole mess caused by urging Ji Young to serve the tiramisu so urgently? And the one who first brought up that suggestion was none other than Sukyeong Jang Nok-soo. At this moment, Nok-soo, who noticed what His Majesty was contemplating, intervened without giving him any more time to think. Your Majesty, the Queen is in critical condition and has even miscarried the prince. This is no ordinary matter. Regardless of whether she knew about the Queen's constitution or not, this is something that must be punished as a serious crime. And that serious crime will certainly include the crime of this humble servant, who simply wanted to serve the Queen a precious dish, without knowing anything. There was already a hint of pathos in Nok-soo's voice as she spoke, as if sobbing. But Ji Young could feel it. Deep within that voice, disguised as pathos, was a sharp, eerie energy lurking, trying to cut off Ji Young's breath. Clearly, this humble servant is not without fault. However, what must be punished more severely is the crime of actually making and serving that heinous dish. I beg you to hold both this humble servant and that cook child responsible and impose a heavy punishment on both of us. A tear like a jade bead trickled down Nok-soo's eye. This was the ultimate blow that Nok-soo had launched at Ji Young. A vicious tactic to acknowledge her own guilt to some extent, while at the same time shifting a much heavier charge onto Ji Young. The so-called sacrificing flesh to break bones. Nok-soo wiped away her tears with her clothes and subtly examined Ji Young's complexion. She wanted to taste a strange pleasure as she watched her face contorted with fear and despair. But what Nok-soo saw was Ji Young's face, staring back at her with sparkling eyes. That face was by no means the expression of someone cornered. There was no way the clever Nok-soo could not have noticed this subtle sense of incongruity. See, could it be? The moment Nok-soo's eyes wavered with a sense of realization, a voice that seemed to shake the Royal Investigation Bureau was heard. The Queen has arrived. Chapter 22. Royal Consort, 3. The Royal Consort is arriving. Everyone gathered at the Royal Investigation Bureau turned their heads in unison toward the voice. Ji Young also turned her head, and the first thing she saw was Jang Jiam, a kitchen apprentice from the royal kitchen. And behind her stood the mother of the nation, the royal consort. It was Shin, the royal consort and head of the inner court. Jang Jiam had brought the royal consort from the queen's residence at the perfect moment. How? Upon seeing the royal consort with her own eyes, Nok-soo's already pale face turned even whiter and began to tremble slightly. As the royal guards who escorted the royal consort spread out to the left and right, one familiar face caught Ji Young's eye. He was wearing a military uniform now, but she had seen him in the marketplace a few days ago wearing a navy robe. It was the man who had delivered the royal consort's secret order. Escorted by him and the other royal guards, the royal consort slowly walked into the Royal Investigation Bureau. What is all this commotion? There was a subtle sense of authority lurking within the royal consort's elegant and gentle voice. Why, Your Majesty, royal consort? Is your health well? I heard you were suffering from a sudden illness. Nok-soo, trying to hide her embarrassment, bowed her head as if to greet the royal consort. She usually maintained a straight posture when meeting the royal consort, but the atmosphere was not conducive to such stiffness now. Royal consort, what is going on? I heard the same news and was greatly concerned. Yeonsan-gun's face also revealed clear signs of bewilderment. He had received a report that the royal consort was seriously ill, which had infuriated him to the point of personally conducting the interrogation, but now the royal consort was appearing in perfect health. What on earth was going on? Not only Yeonsan-gun and Naksu, but also the royal investigators, guards, and royal secretaries gathered at the Royal Investigation Bureau could not help but focus their attention on one person, the royal consort. With a moderate build, balanced posture, a lightly flushed and bright complexion, and a belly that was full and auspiciously protruding with child, there were no signs of illness anywhere. Your Majesty, what are you saying? How could I dare to suffer from an illness with your Majesty's prince in my womb? I heard that you had a severe reaction to the food you ate last night. A reaction? I ate the sweet Western cake that your Majesty personally ordered to be sent, and I enjoyed it immensely after a long time. How can you say such a thing? Thanks to it, the prince in my womb seemed to be happy as well. I was only worried about how to repay your boundless grace. The royal consort slowly smiled as she stroked her protruding belly. And the one who was becoming increasingly anxious as she watched the scene was none other than royal concubine Jang Naksu. The food from yesterday was made with wheat flour. In her anxiety, her true feelings spilled out, and Naksu covered her mouth in surprise. There was no way the royal consort would not notice that. I do not know what went into the food I ate yesterday, but I am certain that it was not wheat flour. My body suffers from acute gastroenteritis when I eat wheat flour. Having said this, the royal consort looked at Naksu's pale face and added, Royal concubine Jang seems to be well aware of this. In that instant, Naksu's always haughty expression twisted dramatically. And no, that's not true. I only learned about it while trying to find the cause of your Majesty's sudden illness. What is going on, royal consort? The royal physicians of the royal hospital also said the same thing about your constitution, so how can you be so healthy? At Yeonsan-gun's words, which indicated that he still did not understand the situation, the royal consort turned her gaze to Ji Young, who was tied to the torture rack. Let's ask this child. At those words, everyone's eyes turned to Ji Young. This was the moment that Ji Young had been waiting for. Your Majesty, the food presented to the royal consort did not contain wheat flour. What? A look of bewilderment crossed Yeonsan-gun's face at those words. Are you saying that you sent different food to the Queen's palace yesterday? No, I did not. How could I disobey your Majesty's command? However, the ingredients were different. The ingredients were different. The king still seemed confused, his eyes wide. Ji Young's eyes, looking at him, began to shine more and more brightly. In front of the marketplace. The note given by the man in the navy robe. The single line written in vernacular script inside. Do not send wheat flour to the Queen's residence. Ji Young recalled that phrase again immediately after receiving Yeonsan-gun's order to send food to the Queen's palace. In principle, Ji Young, who worked in the royal kitchen for the king, would not have any reason to send food to the Queen's palace, so the message was meaningless. But surprisingly, not long after receiving the message, she actually had to send food to the Queen's palace. That meant that the person who sent the message was accurately predicting what would happen inside the palace. So I must not ignore that phrase. In modern terms, this could be called the customer's allergy information, which a chef must check before preparing a dish. And there was something that Ji Young had experienced quite often while working as a chef, so that was why a specific word came to her mind at that moment. Celiac syndrome. This disease, well known as one of the main causes of gluten intolerance, is a condition in which the body cannot digest gluten, a type of protein found in wheat flour. This condition tends to become more sensitive, especially during pregnancy. That's why I used to check even more carefully when there were pregnant women among the customers when I worked at the restaurant. According to modern research, about 1% of the total population is known to have the genes for this condition, so it is not a rare occurrence. The general symptoms of celiac syndrome are mostly mild, such as indigestion and abdominal pain. However, in women, it can cause irregular menstruation or, in extreme cases, even miscarriage and infertility, so it is not something to be taken lightly. Naksu must have known about the royal consort's constitution and intentionally induced her to consume wheat flour. The thought that she almost sent that tiramisu to the queen's residence as it was sent shivers down her spine. But she could not simply not send the tiramisu. If she failed to follow the king's orders, she would certainly be held accountable for that. There is a way. The only way to serve customers with celiac syndrome is not to use gluten, that is, not to use wheat flour. Tiramisu without wheat flour. If this were the modern era, it would not be a difficult task. There are plenty of ingredients that can be used for gluten-free baking. Gluten-free flour, rice flour for baking, or coconut flour or almond flour can be used to bake without gluten without much difficulty. The problem is that this is the Joseon Dynasty. There is no way that coconut, almonds, or gluten-free flour would exist in this era. And she could not just send a completely different, random food that was different from what the king had ordered to be sent to the queen's palace. That would only provide Naksu with another excuse to attack. At this moment, one memory flashed through Ji Young's mind. A unique recipe that she had encountered while researching various forms of gluten-free bread when she was working as a chef. It was a chestnut flour cake, a specialty of Tuscany, Italy. That's it. Chestnut flour is something that I can get easily in this era. As soon as that thought came to her mind, Ji Young hurriedly spoke to the former royal kitchen staff. Former royal kitchen staff, I have a favor to ask. Can you get me some chestnuts? Chestnuts? Are you talking about the chestnuts we eat? Chestnuts are an item that is indispensable for ancestral rites, so it won't be difficult to get them. Ah, that's a relief. Please do me a favor. But didn't you say that you were going to send the same food that was presented to His Majesty to the Queen's residence? So I'm preparing the ingredients in the same way. Ji Young looked and saw the royal kitchen staff taking out a bowl of wheat flour and sifting it finely, just as they had done before. No. It's a little different this time. Instead of wheat flour, I'm going to finely grind dried chestnuts and use that flour. Chestnut flour? No, why? Does anyone know what the royal consort enjoys eating and what she can't eat? No one in the royal kitchen readily answered. The former royal kitchen staff carefully spoke up. It is difficult to know for sure unless you are a queen dowager's kitchen staff. Moreover, royal concubine has strictly ordered that those who serve the king should not freely mingle with the people of the queen's residence. Hearing those words, Ji Young began to get a rough idea of the situation. As expected, it was an environment where it was impossible to get proper information about the royal consort's constitution. Naksu must have been plotting with this in mind. Ji Young had no choice but to briefly explain why she needed chestnut flour instead of wheat flour. Actually, I happened to find out that the royal consort is unable to digest wheat flour due to her constitution. If we present the food as it is, something terrible might happen. As soon as those words were spoken, the inside of the royal kitchen began to stir lightly. Ji Young calmly continued to speak. But you don't have to worry. There is an ingredient that can be used instead of wheat flour. That's the chestnut flour that I just asked for. I've seen something similar being made with chestnut flour in the place where I used to work. At those words, the former royal kitchen staff thought carefully and nodded. Now that I think about it, there are cases where chestnut flour is mixed in when making sweet rice cake to add stickiness. If we do it well, it seems like it could be a good substitute for wheat flour. Please wait a moment. I'll select the best ones and grind them into a fine powder. While the former royal kitchen staff hurriedly brought the chestnuts and ground them into a fine powder, Ji Young and Jang Ji pounded rice to make rice flour. We mixed the rice flour and chestnut flour in the right ratio like this. In front of Jang Ji, who was looking with sparkling eyes, Ji Young added egg yolks, milk, and sugar to the flour and kneaded it while checking the consistency from time to time. When it reaches a consistency similar to the wheat flour dough we made earlier, we try it in the same way. Soon, when the right consistency was achieved, Ji Young put the dough in an earthenware pot and pushed it deep into the corner of the stove. I wonder, will it work? Ji Young replied to the former royal kitchen staff, who asked with worried eyes. We have no choice but to believe and try. There's no other way. How long had they waited? A moment later, when she took the earthenware pot out of the stove, a bright smile spread across Ji Young's face. A yellow and fluffy, beautiful tiramisu cake was revealing its radiant appearance. Indeed, amazing. Those were the first words that came out of the royal consort's mouth after she put a piece of tiramisu in her mouth with a small silver spoon and savored it for a while. The taste of this Western cake is amazing, and so are you for making it all the way here. I am deeply grateful. The royal consort smiled lightly, amused by Ji Young's awkward use of honorifics that she was not yet familiar with. I heard that you came here from a foreign country? That is correct. Thanks to you, I am having a precious experience in this deep royal palace. I am honored. The royal consort took a sip of chrysanthemum tea that came with the tiramisu and continued to speak. Would you like to have an even more precious experience? Yes? Surprised by the sudden question, Ji Young raised her head, her eyes meeting the royal consort's intelligent eyes. The fact that you, who served the king, came to this queen's residence must have come from royal concubine Zhang's mind. How did you know? And the fact that I ate this and have been fine until now means that there is no wheat flour in it. Indeed, she was a surprisingly intelligent woman. Sitting deep in the queen's palace, she knew what was going on inside the palace as if it were the back of her hand. Royal Guard Captain, are you outside? At the royal consort's call, the paper door soon opened, and a man entered the room, knelt down, and bowed. Thick eyebrows and sideburns, the very man who had delivered the secret order to Ji Young in the marketplace. Why you are? The royal consort introduced the man to Ji Young, who was surprised with wide eyes. He is Shin Soo-hyuk, the royal guard captain who protects the palace. And he is also my older brother. The royal consort turned her head slightly toward the royal guard captain, who was kneeling. Older brother, you have done a great service by taking on the difficult task of delivering the secret order. Your Majesty, please lower your words. People are listening. The royal guard captain in military uniform bowed his head even deeper as he replied. The royal consort continued to say more and more perplexing things to Ji Young, who was still bewildered as to what was going on. Ji Young, was it? A little while ago, I asked if you would like to have a precious experience. Yes? I have set a trap in the palace, would you like to see what gets caught? A tea trap. It felt like a strange smile briefly flashed across the royal consort's gentle face. Wouldn't you like to see royal concubine Zhang cornered and wailing? Chapter 23. The Queen, 4. And no, that can't be. The Queen was walking out of the Royal Investigation Bureau, perfectly fine. Seeing this, Naksu's white face and bright red lips were twisted beyond recognition, trembling violently. The Queen simply wore an elegant smile, watching this entire situation as if she were enjoying it. Ji Young drove the wedge in with a resolute voice. The tiramisu presented to the Queen's residence did not contain wheat flour. Instead, it only contained rice flour and chestnut flour. That is why Her Majesty was unharmed after eating it. It was an exquisite delicacy. As the queen lightly added in a gentle tone, Naksu's lips trembled once more. Then I made a fuss over nothing. It's embarrassing, but I'm relieved to know the queen is safe. Yeonsan-gun, whose anger had subsided, noticed Ji-young bound in the stocks. What are you doing? Release that child at once. As soon as the order was given, the guard hurriedly untied the ropes. Only then did the restraints on Ji-young's shoulders and limbs loosen, and blood seemed to rush through her body, causing a tingling sensation. But there was no time to breathe a sigh of relief. Ji-young still had something to finish. Your Majesty, I am afraid to say, it is not nothing. What? What do you mean? Yeonsan-gun, who was about to leave the Royal Investigation Bureau, turned back with a sharp expression. Ji-young began to speak calmly and clearly. A moment ago, royal concubine Jang clearly stated that not knowing is also a sin. Ordering food without knowing is a sin, and making and serving food without knowing is an even greater sin. Why, Your Majesty, no. That's absurd sophistry. Naksu, realizing what Ji-young was about to say, quickly intervened, but it was already too late to turn the situation around. Ji-young continued without regard. Your Majesty, there were two people here for whom not knowing was a sin. One was I, and the other was royal concubine Jang over there. But in fact, I was not unaware of the Queen's constitution, so I made and served food that would not harm Her Majesty. Therefore, it cannot be said that I am guilty of anything. Having said this, Ji-young uttered the next sentence with sharply gleaming eyes. Then now, who is the one who remains guilty? You wench! How dare you wag your wicked tongue? Naksu screamed. Was it because she realized that the sharp blade that had been aimed at others' flaws was now pointed directly at herself? She had already lost her composure and was trembling all over. Upon listening, there is some truth in what she says. The queen, who had been maintaining a silent smile, quietly but powerfully added a word. According to royal concubine Zhang's words, not knowing is also a sin. Upon listening, it could have been a situation where not only I but also the life of the prince in my womb could have been endangered. Why, Your Majesty? As royal concubine Zhang herself said, it is right to punish this matter severely. Please, forgive me. With those words, Jang Naksu collapsed and prostrated herself at the queen's feet. It was something that had never happened before. According to the law, it was perfectly natural for a royal concubine of the third rank to pay respects to the queen, the head of the inner court. But until this moment, no one had ever seen that natural act. Yet Jang Naksu, who had been so arrogant and presumptuous, was now trembling and kneeling before the queen. The queen's face, as she quietly looked down at Naksu, was as exquisitely elegant as Joseon porcelain even in that situation. But her inner thoughts were probably not as graceful as they appeared. Your Majesty, how can the strictness of the national law be upheld if words once spoken are taken lightly? Today, a severe example must be set. Those who heard that cold voice could feel more and more certain that the queen would never let this matter pass. That gentle queen, who never said a harsh word even to the lowly water maidens, was now strongly demanding Naksu's punishment. Naksu's kneeling body was trembling like an aspen for the first time. Because the queen's clear will to punish her severely was added to the cunning charge that had ensnared herself. No matter how skilled Naksu was, it was a difficult situation to escape. The Royal Investigation Bureau was now filled with a tense atmosphere, as if standing on the edge of a blade. I shall decree. Yeonsan-gun, who had been silent for a while, finally opened his mouth. Everyone was so careful not to even breathe, wondering what kind of punishment would be handed down. Until further notice, I order royal concubine Jang Naksu to be confined indefinitely. She is not allowed to step outside of Chwaihongwon. I shall obey Your Majesty's command. As if waiting for it, Royal Guard Shin Suhayok loudly repeated and bowed. At the same time, Naksu, who had been trembling slightly, dropped her head and collapsed to the floor. "Thank you for your grace." Although she was not given the death penalty, it was a punishment no less severe for Naksu. It was the first time that the prestige of her, who had always been attached to His Majesty's side and acted like a tongue in his mouth, had been cracked. At that time, the eyes of His Majesty that Naksu looked at were cold eyes that she had never seen before. I will conclude the interrogation here. Everyone, return to the palace quickly. Leaving behind Naksu, who had collapsed like ruins, Yeonsan-gun turned his body so coldly that the sound of the wind could be heard, and the officials who had gathered at the Royal Investigation Bureau followed him all at once. Royal Cuisine Master. You were almost in big trouble. As soon as the situation was settled, Jang Jiam, who had rushed over, was teary-eyed. Indeed, Jang Jiam's role in this matter could not be overlooked. Because the most reliable person was needed to bring the queen here. Thank you, Jang Jiam. You saved me. Hooing. Don't say that. Let's go back to the royal kitchen quickly. I don't want to be here for even a second longer. Jang Jiam hurriedly grabbed Ji Young's arm, lest she fall behind the returning crowd. And another person was watching Ji Young. I will never, never forgive you. It was Naksu, lying on the cold floor of the Royal Investigation Bureau, staring at Ji Young's receding figure without blinking. Her eyes were filled with a chillingly sharp anger. Harboring a terrible desire for revenge, like poison, to repay the humiliation she had received today many times over. By the way, you there, don't stand there blankly and bring a refreshment table. I'm feeling a bit peckish from all the worrying. His Majesty, who was leaving the Royal Investigation Bureau and returning to the palace, suddenly gave an order to Ji Young, who was following behind. I shall obey your Majesty's command. Surprised by the sudden order, Ji Young hastily replied and bowed her head. As she glanced at the queen, she was surprised to see that the queen was also gazing intently at Ji Young. Only then could Ji Young feel it. That the queen was giving her a thank you with her eyes. All Ji Young could do there was to respond with her eyes in the same way. But even that was as good as a conversation. Although they could not say it out loud, this secret operation that the two had successfully carried out together had allowed them to communicate with each other. And there was a quick-witted person who watched the subtle moment and grasped all the context in an instant. None other than Royal Secretary Im Seung-jae. Oh ho! Look at this! The incident that had just occurred was a kind of victory that the Queen and Ji Young had won together against Naksu. What should really be noted here is that the key element of victory was not with the Queen, but with that unfamiliar woman, Ji Young. Although it was only for a moment, there was no way that the quick-witted Seung-jae could have failed to read the eyes of His Majesty, which were shaking uneasily when he saw Ji Young tied to the stocks. Perhaps that thing might be more useful than I thought. Seung-jae's slender eyes, looking at Ji Young, shone like a snake. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. A few days later, the palace garden. If you go up to the northern end, there is a unique earthen chamber managed by the Office of Royal Gardens, an office that cultivates flowers and fruits for use in the palace. Building the walls by mixing mud and rice straw was no different from ordinary houses, but what caught the eye was its unique roof. Instead of roof tiles or straw, there was a wooden frame placed diagonally, and oiled paper was pasted on the frame. So the sunlight was entering the room as it was. An even more amazing sight unfolded inside the earthen chamber. The floor of the room was covered with fine soil. It looked as if a garden had been created inside the room. And along the furrows of the field, all kinds of vegetables, fruits, and flowers were growing in abundance. This is what I've only heard about, the world's first greenhouse. Ji Young's eyes widened at the sight of this place, the earthen chamber of the Office of Royal Gardens, which was said to have been built 170 years before the greenhouse in Heidelberg, Germany. It was the moment when she saw with her own eyes the space that she had only seen in history books as letters. The greenhouse floor is covered with heated stones. Even in winter, the inside of the greenhouse can be kept warm, so there is nothing that cannot be grown, whether it is flowers, vegetables, or fruits. Oh my goodness. Yeonsan-gun, who had taken Ji-young all the way here to show her the office of royal gardens, took off her shoes and stepped inside, stepping on the soil barefoot. The moist, warm, and fertile soil was felt through the soles of her feet. Despite the rather chilly outside air, the inside of the earthen chamber was filled with colorful flowers and fruits, and filled with a fragrant and fresh smell, as if it were another world. It's really amazing. How can there be a place like this in this era? In this era. Ji-young realized her mistake as soon as she uttered the words, but Yeonsan-gun did not seem to care much. It's thanks to the dozens of people in the office of royal gardens who manage it thoroughly every day. It wouldn't be possible with ordinary effort. Well, if the flowers don't grow properly, the managers will be torn to pieces. To manage this artificial greenhouse, which is full of flowers and fruits all year round, it must be necessary to grind in manpower purely, but it seemed that he had solved it in a way that was typical of Yeonsan-gun. How is it? Do you like it? Why yes. It's really amazing. Then, I will grant you special permission. I will allow you to enter and leave this place at any time, so use it as you please. Ji-young's eyes widened for a moment. Why is a human being who always has words like kill, punish, and tear to pieces suddenly acting like this? You're giving me permission to use this place? Why? At those words, Yeonsan-gun looked at Ji-young with a face as if asking why she was asking such a question. That's how you can get vegetables and fruits that are not in season. Have you already forgotten that if you serve royal meals that do not suit my taste, you will be severely punished? That's right. What were you thinking? All of His Majesty's orders to Ji-young ultimately come down to one thing: to serve new and delicious royal meals every evening. If she fails to fulfill that mission even for one day, Ji-young's life cannot be guaranteed. Suddenly, I'm starting to dislike this place a little. Ha? What did you say? It's nothing. Shall we go back now? The figures of the two people slowly walking out of the flower path of the office of royal gardens looked like a painting from afar. At the same time, the Office of Special Advisors. In this place where the scriptures and documents of the palace are recorded and stored, a young official wearing a government uniform was frantically looking for something. If it is something to be found in the Office of Special Advisors, it must be scriptures or historical records, which are the materials for the annals. But this young official does not seem to be looking for ordinary books. He was rummaging through closets, pencil cases, and bookshelves as if he were on a treasure hunt. Then, as if he had suddenly found something, the young official's bloodshot eyes widened. In his hand was a small cabinet sealed with a steel wire. His face began to turn blue as he broke the seal and opened the cabinet. Cold sweat was pouring out all over his body, and his fingertips were trembling. He hurriedly stuffed the cabinet into his arms and quickly came out of the Office of Special Advisors. After looking around several times to make sure there was no one watching, he hurried to Jeonsan Gate, the east gate of Gyeongbok Palace. What's going on? It's not time for you to leave work yet. At the words of the guard guarding Jeonsan Gate, the young official responded with a serious face. I am Lee Jang-gun, a professor at the Office of Special Advisors. I have to go somewhere urgently by order of His Majesty. It's a matter of urgency. Soon the sound of Jeonsan Gate opening was heard, followed by the sound of horses galloping across the center of the capital. The eyes of Lee Jang-gun, a professor at the Office of Special Advisors, who was riding on a horse with his clothes fluttering, were filled with a determined spirit. Chapter 24. The Butcher Woman, 1. Mu Dash. A brindle ox tied to a tether blinked its large eyes and let out a long bellow. At that very moment, a sharp iron hammer flew accurately towards the space between the ox's eyebrows. Thud! Though it hadn't completely shed its calfhood, its massive frame collapsed without a scream, as easily as if it were nothing. Soon after, a small, sharp blade neatly severed the bulging artery beneath its neck, and warm blood gushed out like a burst dam. While the blood filled the wooden tub placed beneath, the sound of a dark, cast-iron knife being sharpened against a whetstone could be heard. As soon as the sound ceased, the large blade slid smoothly, slicing open the ox's belly. The entrails spilled onto the straw mat laid on the ground, and a hot steam rose with a fishy smell. Ugh! Disgusting! Jang Jiam, who had been watching the scene with her face covered by her jangoti, frowned and turned her head away. Being young, she was not yet accustomed to such sights. Ji Young, who was watching beside her, was not unaffected, but it was a spectacle she couldn't take her eyes off from beginning to end. The raw energy of the butchering. It was completely different from the neatly managed meat processing facilities where she sometimes saw meat being broken down when she worked as a chef in modern times. But why did that person follow us here? Jang Jiam, the royal kitchen trainee who always trailed after Ji Young, gestured with her eyes towards the man standing blankly beside them. Standing there was a man with a towel mask on his head, Gongil. When Gongil's eyes met Jang Jiam's, he grinned nonchalantly, causing Jang Jiam's face to turn red as she quickly turned her head away. Gongil replied in a nonchalant voice. Our royal cuisine master said she wanted to see the cattle market, so I came along. This place is where all sorts of riffraff gather. A riffraff like me should accompany you, because it wouldn't be right for just the hanga, a respectful term for court ladies, to come alone. Even after hearing those words, Jang Jiam's brow remained furrowed. Perhaps because of her memory of being harassed by the masked clown at the market the other day, she seemed very uncomfortable with Gongil. Ji Young wasn't particularly fond of Gongil either, but in this situation, she had no choice but to soothe Jang Jiam. That person, even if he's a bit strange, doesn't seem like a bad person. Besides, we came outside the palace without you Naguan knowing, so it's reassuring to have him here. I feel even more uneasy with him here. At that moment, another cheer erupted from the crowd gathered there. A blue blade danced over the carcass of the ox, from which all the entrails and blood had been removed. It seemed that the full-scale dismantling work was about to begin. In an instant, the blade flashed by, and in the blink of an eye, the ox's hide was peeled off, the muscles were separated, and the bones were removed. All that was needed for this entire process was a single sharp knife. And the one person wielding that knife. The way the blade slipped effortlessly between the ox's muscles, without much force, was something that only someone who had been engaged in butchering all their life could do. Butcher. Those who made butchering their profession, called one of the 8 lowest classes of Joseon society. Before this butcher, the single ox had been transformed into materials with different uses, such as meat, bones, entrails, and hide. Not a single unnecessary scrap of flesh was wasted in the process. Such skillful knife work. However, what captivated the viewers was not only the butcher's amazing skill. Arms that were somewhat slender but with firm, toned muscles, clearly visible beyond the sleeveless top. A slender waist without any excess fat, delicate shoulders, and a dark nape of the neck peeking out from under the roughly tied-up hair. The butcher was a woman. Wow! Ji Young couldn't help but express her surprise at the sight. Even in modern times, female butchers were rare, so how much more of a spectacle would it have been back then? That woman's skills are quite impressive. Gongil, who was watching beside her, shrugged as if he was also surprised. The people gathered at the cattle market seemed to be itching to say something about the rare sight. That butcher woman's knife skills are something else. Her hands are deft, just amazing. I wonder who that woman's husband is. It must be wild at night. He. The words that the onlookers casually threw out were occasionally mixed with crude jokes. Perhaps they thought lightly of her because she was a lowly butcher. But the butcher woman didn't care and boldly called out to the people. "Come on, this isn't something you see every day. This is a fantastic piece of tender meat. Those who want to buy meat, come this way, and those who want to buy leather, go to the cobbler over there." Perhaps intrigued by the unusual sight of a female butcher, more and more spectators began to gather. Seeing this, Ji-young grabbed Jang Ji-um's arm and pulled her along. "Let's hurry and go before it gets too late." It seemed like they had to get in line quickly if they wanted to buy a good cut. The female butcher was already busy cutting meat and weighing it, moving her body without a moment's rest, as orders poured in. Behind her, a good number of people had also gathered in front of an old male butcher selling leather. Judging by their similar appearances, they seemed to be a butcher family working together. At that moment, another kind of commotion began to be heard from the opposite side of the cattle market. The sound of arguing and scuffling, followed by rough and irregular footsteps. A group of men was rushing in, kicking up dust. "Oh dear. It looks like things are going to get complicated again. Quickly, move aside." As if he had already guessed what was about to happen, Gong-gil quickly pulled Ji-young and Jang Ji-um to the side of the road. The people gathered at the cattle market also sensed that the atmosphere was unusual and scattered like frightened rabbits. What's going on? Before Gong-gil could answer Ji-young's question, who had not yet grasped the situation, one of the men who had suddenly appeared approached the butcher woman and abruptly struck the table with a club. Bang! The table shattered, and the scales, cutting board, and chunks of meat on it all tumbled onto the dirt floor. It seemed that starting with intimidation was their way of speaking. "Who gave you butcher bastards permission to make such a mess here? Ha! What do you think you're doing? What do you think you're doing, not knowing how scary the world is?" The man made a menacing face at the butcher woman and casually slung the club over his shoulder. The men gathered around him also wore similar expressions, fiddling with the clubs in their hands. What is that? Gangsters? Ruffians? When Ji-young asked in a whisper, Gong-gil shook his head without taking his eyes off the scene. "They're the people from Bangkok who run the Hyeonbang." Hyeonbang. Bangkok. When Ji-young tilted her head, unfamiliar with the terms, Gong-gil explained simply. Bangkok is a village under Sunkyunkwan, and the government slaves who work at Sunkyunkwan run meat shops called Hyeonbang there. You could say they're government-licensed meat shops. But why are the people who work at that Hyeonbang doing this? They're the only ones officially allowed to sell meat within the capital. Besides, the Bangkok people, the Hyeonbang half-men, are government slaves of Sunkyunkwan, so they have powerful backing. In other words, they had connections with high-ranking officials from Sunkyunkwan. As if to prove Gong-gil's words, the Hyeonbang half-men put on airs as if they were officials on patrol and threatened the butcher woman. Don't you know that the country forbids unauthorized private butchering like this? Is it authorized by the country to come and act like thugs while others are doing business? You should be begging for forgiveness, but instead, you're talking back. Enough, let's see the list of registered merchants at the Office of Market Supervision. Let's see if your Hyeonbang is registered with the Office of Market Supervision or not. Gong-gil couldn't help but chuckle at the butcher woman's words. It was true that the Hyeonbang had a monopoly on meat sales within the capital. But that was just a custom that arose in exchange for the Hyeonbang providing meat for the ancestral rites held at Sunkyunkwan. The butcher woman knew that it wasn't a codified right like the 6 licensed stores. What nonsense are you spouting? Do you even know how to read if we show you something? Our father, who's standing behind me, may be a butcher, but he can read. But can you even read a single line while doing this? Even a dog at a village school can recite poetry after 3 years, but what are you doing with clubs in your hands, you people who work in Bangkok under Sunkyunkwan? This butcher woman is fearlessly. You're really in trouble today. The man, as if stung to the quick, spat dry saliva into his palm and raised the club threateningly. Let's see if you can still talk after getting a good beating. A murmur began to spread among the spectators. Even if she was a butcher, her bones might break or she might faint if she was hit by such a club as a woman. Shouldn't we do something? It looks like something bad is going to happen. Well. Despite Ji-yeon's worried words, Gong-gil simply watched the scene unfolding before him with his arms crossed, as if he found it interesting. Are you going to hit someone with that club? Can you really hit me? You're pushing me to the edge. Fine, consider today your death anniversary. The Hyeonbang half-man, enraged by the butcher woman's words, couldn't control his anger and swung the club with all his might. Whoosh! The sound of the club cutting through the air echoed. And, almost simultaneously, the sound of something being neatly cut off was heard. The next moment, what the spectators saw was a club that had been cleanly cut in half. And the butcher woman was holding the dark, cast-iron knife that she had been using to butcher the ox just a moment ago under the Hyeonbang half-man's chin. Today is. Whose death anniversary did you say it was? The king's office in Gyeongbok Palace, Sejongjeon. Everyone is dismissed for today. Among the officials hurrying out of the throne hall, one person caught the eye as he hesitated. Royal Secretary Im Song-jae. Royal Secretary, do you have something to say? I am afraid to ask, but I have something urgent to tell you, Your Majesty. Stay behind for a moment. The empty throne hall, from which all the civil and military officials had departed. Before long, only the king and Sung-jae remained there. What is it? It's about the matter of Scholar Lee of the Office of Special Advisors. Lee Jang-gun, you mean? I was wondering why he hasn't brought me what I ordered him to bring. I was curious. That is. I am afraid to report it. Sung-jae's complexion gradually turned pale, and cold sweat broke out. He hesitated for a long time, unable to bring himself to say the words, before finally spitting them out. Scholar Lee of the Office of Special Advisors has disappeared. Chapter 25. The Butcher Woman, 2. The cattle market had already turned into a chaotic mess, a complete free-for-all. Objects flew through the air, and clubs and fists slashed through the void. The cattle market merchants had been accumulating grievances against the Hyeonbang people, who constantly interfered with their business, questioning whether they were engaging in unauthorized slaughter. Like dry straw catching fire in an instant, they all rushed in with a what-the-heck attitude, and the situation escalated. In this pandemonium filled with curses and kicks, only the innocent cows mooed and cried. However, even amidst all this, the Hyeonbang half-men's attacks on the butcher woman were relentless. Not a chance. Each time, the woman dodged with the flexibility of a willow branch, neatly slicing the incoming clubs in two. But among them, one of the half-men, quietly biding his time, approached the woman from behind and pulled something from his chest. A gleaming, sharp-bladed dagger. At that moment. Ouch! The one who drew the dagger suddenly lost his balance as if he had tripped over a stone and tumbled to the ground. Gong-gil, who had been watching from a distance, quickly kicked out his hamstring. TSK, you shouldn't resort to such underhanded tactics. Gong-gil nonchalantly put his hands behind his back and stepped back to become a spectator again. How long had it been since the chaos erupted? Like muddy water settling down once a few loaches wriggled away. As the Hyeonbang half-men, each nursing a bruise or two, limped away, the chaos gradually began to subside. You scoundrels! I'll report you all to the authorities, so you know. You dared to engage in unauthorized slaughter without permission, you won't get away unscathed. As the Hyeonbang people made their threats while slowly retreating, the voices of the cattle market people naturally grew louder. Kiss my ass, you bastards. All talk and no action, huh? As one of the cattle market merchants brought a handful of salt and threw it at them, the tumultuous brawl, like a performance, came to an end. Those damn bastards. Feels good to get that off my chest. As if venting their pent-up frustrations, the cattle market people each uttered a curse or two. But their moment of small satisfaction was short-lived. Turning around, they saw that the cattle market was already in ruins, with a closing down atmosphere. The tents supported by bamboo poles, the benches where they sold soup, the fences where the cows were tied, all broken and scattered on the dirt ground. The bigger problem was that it wasn't just about losing business for the day. We managed to chase them away, but I don't know if this is going to be okay. What if the authorities really come? How should I know? We should run first. I'm going to skip the next market day. I should do that too. I'm afraid of getting blamed for something. As if finally realizing the reality of the situation, the people gathered at the cattle market hurriedly packed their belongings with worried faces and scattered. Hey, butcher woman. It's good to be brave, but if the authorities come, you'll be the first one to suffer. You should get out of here. One of the cattle market merchants, holding a cow's leash, whispered to the butcher woman and disappeared. But the butcher woman stood there blankly, unable to move easily. It was understandable. Those who had already sold their cows could take the money and leave, and those who hadn't sold their cows could simply take them and leave. But the butcher woman was in a different situation. She had to sell the butchered meat, but a brawl had broken out, so she had slaughtered a cow, which was like her entire fortune, and couldn't make a single penny. Bong Dan, that's enough. It's enough that you're safe. Let's go back quickly. The old butcher comforted the woman, called Bong Dan, but she didn't seem to be able to move. Hurry before something worse happens. Father, but it's unfair. Tears welled up in the eyes of the butcher woman, Bong Dan. She roughly knew that there was localism, but she had never heard that it was this severe. But what was even more heartbreaking was that, as a butcher, they only received contempt and ridicule, and no one would come forward to help them. How long do we have to live like this? Bong Dan, stop it. Have you forgotten that we have more important things to do? Hearing her father's words, Bong Dan couldn't say anything more and reluctantly turned around. At that time. Wait a minute. The one who called out to them was Ji Young. Ji Young suddenly held out a bundle of cloth in front of Bong Dan, who was looking at her with wary eyes. Give me everything, as much as it's worth. What are you asking for? Didn't you see the brawl just now? Why, are you going to take that too? The butcher woman pointed to the ground with a cynical tone. Pieces of meat were scattered all over the dirt ground. Among them, the ones that were still usable had long been picked up by the beggar children wandering around the cattle market. Not that. I mean the parts that are still left. I'm saying I'll pay the proper price, so I want all of that. The butcher woman looked back and forth between the bundle of cloth in front of her and Ji Young's face with a puzzled expression. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Why did you leave your post without saying a word? As soon as Ji Young returned to the palace and stepped into the royal kitchen, Yoon Naegwon, the provision officer, poured out his scolding with a fuss. The palace is in an uproar, and it's about to become a disaster. I just went to get some ingredients. Is there a problem? As Ji Young answered cautiously, Yoon Naegwon's face was already pale. A court official has disappeared. And it's a trusted subject of His Majesty from the Office of Special Advisors. An official disappears? I don't know the details well, but the last ones who saw him were the soldiers guarding the east gate of Gyeongbok Palace. They say he left the palace in that direction and hasn't been heard from since. Is that such a big problem? Of course, it is. It's a case where a key member of the court suddenly disappeared. And this is a secret. Yoon Naegwon looked around exaggeratedly, as if afraid someone might be listening, and lowered his voice even further. The missing Instructor Lee of the Office of Special Advisors disappeared with the sealed box that His Majesty ordered him to bring. A sealed box. Yoon Naegwon clicked his tongue as if frustrated and glared at Ji Young. The word sealed box, literally translated, means a box sealed with iron strings. A secret document of the court that could cause a huge aftermath if it became known to the public. But the contents should not be forgotten forever, so hoping that it would be passed down to future generations, the secret document was tightly sealed in a box. Sealed box, gold, refers to that. The box containing the palace's top secret documents has disappeared with him, so how could that be a normal thing? The atmosphere in the palace is already uneasy because of that, and the royal cuisine master is nowhere to be seen, so how could the royal kitchen not be on emergency alert? I was going to buy new ingredients, but... Hearing those words, Ji Young's voice shrank as she felt like she had done something terribly wrong. But on the other hand, she also felt a bit wronged. To fulfill His Majesty's command to always present new dishes, she had to go outside the palace to find new ingredients. But Yoon Naegwon wasn't the kind of person who would consider such circumstances. Thanks to you, His Majesty is very displeased right now, so you should know that if you don't pay special attention to the evening royal cuisine table, something very bad will happen. Leaving behind words that were somewhere between advice and warning, Yoon Naegwon disappeared out of the royal kitchen. It seemed that matching the tastes of the already picky His Majesty had become even more difficult today. Can we really put what you bought today on the royal cuisine table? It seems like we need to bring all the delicacies of the world to make up for it. Jang Jiam, the royal kitchen trainee next to her, had a very anxious expression. Of course, she would. What Ji Young had paid for and bought from the butcher woman was not beef, but offal. I've heard that there are people who eat offal, but I heard that it's what butchers and commoners who slaughter cows eat. If we put that before His Majesty, something terrible might happen. There's no need to worry. His Majesty will definitely like it. In fact, Ji Young, a modern person, had one thing in mind. A record that was often cited when talking about Yeonsan-gun's bizarre tastes. Yeonsan-gun usually enjoyed eating dishes made with animal placentas. I can't get a placenta right now, but I can get beef offal. Based on that record, she had a brilliant idea to create a dish that would please Yeonsan-gun. *****. Are you trying to mock me now? No way. The atmosphere in Gangneongjin, where the royal cuisine table was brought, was icy. Perhaps because the royal cuisine table was brought up late at night due to the incident that had made the palace uneasy, the king was more sensitive than usual. Yeonsan-gun picked up a piece of food from the royal cuisine table with silver chopsticks, smelled it, and frowned. Isn't this a dish made with offal? How dare you bring such a lowly dish, which is only eaten by those who slaughter animals, to the royal cuisine table? Ji Young felt slightly embarrassed by His Majesty's cold reaction. Was the story that he liked dishes made with cow placentas just a rumor? Or was it before His Majesty had encountered that dish? In any case, she had to get through the crisis quickly. Ji Young pulled herself together and spoke clearly. No, it is by no means a lowly dish. Rather, it is a precious dish. What? The butchers who slaughter animals are the ones who know meat better than anyone else. The part they take first is the offal. The reason why offal dishes were not highly regarded in this era was due to the nature of offal, which spoils easily compared to meat. In an environment without a refrigerated distribution system, only those who slaughtered cows or pigs on a daily basis could have access to fresh offal. That's why the perception that it was a food eaten by butchers was created, but offal itself is by no means a low-quality ingredient. Those who slaughter animals have been feeding their families for many years with dishes made with offal. It has been said since ancient times that the people regard food as heaven. Shouldn't we know what they eat in order to govern them? Know what they eat to govern them? Ji Young nodded. The people regard food as heaven. She never thought she would mention that phrase from historical records, which was also quoted in Record of Yearning for the Clouds, here. Since I happened to meet a skilled butcher who could handle freshly slaughtered offal and prepare it, it is a very precious dish. Yeonsan-gun seemed to be slowly becoming interested. Then explain what kind of dish it is. Ji Young, who had succeeded in attracting Yeonsan-gun's attention, pointed to the dish in the very center of the royal cuisine table. This is a dish made with the thymus of a calf thymus. In France, it is a top-quality ingredient called riz de veau. Specifically, it refers to the area from the thymus to the pancreas in a calf. In English, it is called sweetbread, and as the name suggests, its characteristic is its creamy and soft texture. However, as the cow grows, the thymus shrinks and hardens, so only the thymus of young calves is considered the highest quality. Fortunately, the cow I saw in the cattle market wasn't fully grown, so there was some usable thymus left. Ji Young first lightly boiled the thymus she had obtained from the cattle market, then cooked it using the pole method, cooking over high heat in a pan, then covering with a lid and cooking over low heat. The point of the French-style thymus cooking method is to delicately preserve the creamy and moist texture. And this one is the fourth stomach of the cow, the abomasum. Ji Young pointed to a special dish using chewy cooked abomasum. In modern Korea, the term makchang is more commonly used, but to be precise, abomasum refers only to the reddish part of it. It is not easy to prepare, and it is a precious ingredient that only yields about 400 G per cow. If you lightly cook this abomasum, it boasts a very unique texture. She added verde sauce, a green sauce made by mincing vegetables, to add a refreshing flavor. Of course, the original verde sauce contains prezzemolo, Italian parsley, but you can use water dropwort instead to create a similar nuance. After all, parsley is a plant in the water dropwort family. Moreover, Korean water dropwort is called water parsley in English, so they are cousins. Finally, Ji Young used steamed bread with a slightly toasted surface instead of bread, and topped it with abomasum like an open sandwich. The so-called lampredotto, a specialty of Florence, Italy. After whetting your appetite with the calf thymus dish, it's perfect to eat this lampredotto. That's how the royal cuisine table was completed. Calf thymus pole and steamed bread lampredotto with water dropwort verde sauce. Shall I taste it? Tasting is unnecessary. I will eat it first. Yeonsan-gun, who had been looking at the royal cuisine table, could no longer bear it and hurriedly placed his chopsticks on the royal cuisine table. The first thing he put in his mouth was the calf thymus dish. As soon as he put a piece in his mouth, Yeonsan-gun's eyebrows shot up. Oh hot, this is a delicacy of the world. It's so soft and smooth, it's like silk. The first thing he felt in his mouth was the creamy texture. At the same time, Yeonsan-gun seemed speechless for a while at the savory taste that washed over him like a wave. After savoring the taste for a long time, Yeonsan-gun turned his gaze to the next dish with an expectant expression. A unique visual with plump abomasum on top of a yellowish toasted steamed bread. This time, he even put down his chopsticks. As he held the lampredotto in both hands and took a big bite without hesitation, Yeonsan-gun's face dramatically changed again. Ooh, what an amazing taste! Chewy yet greasy, this exquisite taste. While Ji Young was prostrating herself in front of the royal cuisine table, Yeonsan-gun was greedily eating what was on it, shaking his head in admiration. To think that only the butchers were eating this delicious thing. How outrageous! Ji Young, who was secretly peeking at the scene, let out a sigh of relief without anyone noticing. Judging from that reaction, I got through it safely today. It was a good defense just by not offending Yeonsan-gun's very uncomfortable mood. At this time, a random word suddenly popped out of Yeonsan-gun's mouth. I want to see the ingredients that made this dish raw. It was a sudden order, but Ji Young responded calmly. This was also within the expected range. I thought His Majesty might be curious, so I prepared it. Ji Young proudly presented a bowl containing raw offal. It was thanks to Sung-jae, who had told her in advance that Yeonsan-gun sometimes wanted to see the ingredients used in the dishes. Sung-jae is quite useful after all, cleanly prepared pink abomasum and thymus. And various other offal. A hint of interest began to be seen in Yeonsan-gun's eyes. So these are the offal. But at that moment, Yeonsan-gun's eyebrows twitched as if he had seen something that suddenly caught his eye. Where did you get this? I bought it at the cattle market this afternoon. No, not that, the one underneath it. Yes? If it was the one underneath it, was he talking about the paper that was wrapping the ingredients? Are you talking about the paper that was used to wrap the offal? Are you sure you wrapped the offal in this paper? Yeonsan-gun's expression had already turned serious. Ji Young felt bewildered, not knowing what was going on, but she couldn't help but nod. Why yes, Your Majesty. At those words, Yeonsan-gun abruptly picked up the paper that had wrapped the intestines and began to examine it under the lamp, turning it this way and that. This paper is called willow paper, made by the royal paper mill. It's something you can never find on the market. That can't be. I clearly saw the butcher woman wrapping it with this paper. Then there must be a reason why the butchers have paper from the royal paper mill. A reason? What do you mean? Do you know who handles the most paper in the palace? Handles paper. Could it be? Yeonsan-gun's eyes began to gleam intensely, as if he had caught a clue. It's the Hongmengwan officials who manage the documents. Chapter 26. The Secret Journey, 1. What do you think? There's no doubt about it. Royal Secretary Sung-jae, who had rushed over after being urgently summoned in the middle of the night, examined the paper front and back several times before answering. This is high-quality paper made by the Royal Paper Workshop. Paper supplied to the court in the hands of a commoner. How do you explain this? Sung-jae frowned, pondered for a moment, and then slowly opened his mouth. Commoners are descendants of the nomadic people who settled in this country. Although they have lived on this land for a long time and speak Joseon, they still cannot abandon the customs and habits of the barbarians. Even ordinary commoners are ashamed to associate with them and do not intermarry. I know that much. What is concerning is that they do not farm and have a tendency to wander from place to place, so there have been more than a few cases of robbery and theft. Robbery. Then, the disappearance of scholar Lee Yong of the Office of Special Advisors. It is certain that commoners attacked Scholar Lee as he was leaving the palace and stole his belongings. He was last seen at Jeonsan Gate, which is in the same direction as the cattle market. Sung-jae spoke as if he had already concluded that the commoners were the culprits. It wasn't as if his words were entirely without basis. In fact, the annals recorded that more than half of the hundreds of robberies and murders that occurred in the early and mid-Joseon period were committed by commoners. I will order the royal guards to be released immediately to capture them. And no, that's absurd. How can you do that without any evidence? When Ji Young, who had been listening, interjected, Sung-jae glared at her and held out the paper. No evidence? What is this, then, if not evidence? If we don't act quickly, the commoners who attacked the court official will escape. Ji Young had no choice but to shut her mouth at his fierce tone, but her doubts did not disappear. The figures of the commoner woman Bongdan and her father, whom she had met that day, were vivid in her mind. The commoner woman who wielded her knife like a dance, dissecting a huge cow. Could they really have attacked Scholar Lee and stolen his belongings? Yeonsan-gun also frowned, unable to reach a conclusion easily. What does the Royal Guard commander think? Royal Guard Commander Shin Soo-hyuk, who had also been summoned, cautiously added to Sung-jae's conjecture. I am sorry to disagree, but my thoughts are somewhat different from the royal secretaries. At those words, Im Sung-jae frowned uncomfortably. How could Royal Guard Commander Shin Soo-hyuk, who was closest to the missing scholar Lee Jang-gun, say such a thing? Were you not close to Scholar Lee? And yet you say that? At Im Sung-jae's sidelong glance, Shin Soo-hyuk responded in a calm voice. I say this because I know Scholar Lee well. The missing scholar Lee Jang-gun and Royal Guard Commander Shin Soo-hyuk. At first glance, these two people had no reason to be close. A civil official and a military officer. Moreover, there was little contact between an official who managed documents in the Office of Special Advisors, which was like the Royal Library, and the Royal Guard unit. Nevertheless, there was one thing that tied them together. That was martial arts. Lee Jang-gun possessed such outstanding martial talent that it was hard to believe he was a civil official. In particular, the sparring matches between Lee Jang-gun and Shin Soo-hyuk, which took place from time to time, were rumored to be so amazing that they left spectators gaping. A talent for command, why is this man in the Office of Special Advisors? That was what Shin Soo-hyuk had thought the first day they crossed swords. Lee Jang-gun's fluid and unrestrained swordsmanship was admirable even from Shin Soo-hyuk's perspective, who was receiving it. Was it not said that friendship is made through martial arts? In that way, the two had become close friends who could share their deepest thoughts. For such Lee Jang-gun to be attacked by mere commoners was something he could not accept, no matter how he thought about it. But, well, you never know. If commoners are determined to rob and launch a surprise attack, even the most skilled Lee Jang-gun would be helpless. Sung-jae still seemed unwilling to let go of his suspicion of the commoners. After a period of contemplation, a decisive word finally flowed from Yeonsan-gun's mouth. Then, there is only one way to confirm it. That is correct. I will order the immediate arrest of all commoners in Hanyang, throughout the country. I will personally set out to find them as soon as it dawns. Is there any doubt? As soon as it dawns. Yes? Your Majesty? Sung-jae's eyes widened at the sudden, unexpected words. PP personally, you say? I will leave the palace in commoner's clothes as soon as it dawns, so prepare accordingly. Sung-jae, who had been momentarily bewildered by the king's sudden remark, belatedly grasped its meaning and prostrated himself in surprise. Why, Your Majesty, please reconsider. How can you not protect your royal body? This is a matter of the court's prestige. There is no need to make a fuss. Besides, Yeonsan-gun's face was quite serious, as if he had made up his mind. It was clear that he was not giving orders on a whim, as he usually did. There is a thing we must find, is there not? A thing that I must confirm before anyone else. Royal Guard Commander, prepare to depart. Yes, Your Majesty. Royal Guard Commander Shin Soo-hyuk bowed as soon as the order was given, as if he was already prepared. And Royal Cuisine Master. Yes? Prepare yourself as well. Ji Young's eyes widened at Yeonsan-gun's sudden words. Me? Why? Do you intend to let me starve outside the palace? Have you already forgotten that I ordered you to serve me meals every day? This psycho king. It was already difficult enough to serve him in the palace, but what kind of hardship would she have to endure if she followed him outside? But I am very busy with royal kitchen duties. There is a former royal cuisine master. He has worked in the royal kitchen for much longer than you, so there is no need to worry. Prepare yourself without further ado. As if there was no need to wait for Ji Young's reply, Yeonsan-gun turned to Sung-jae and issued orders without hesitation. Royal Secretary, you will remain here and take care of the aftermath. And prepare the Jayam-zabak to be dispatched immediately in case of emergency. Sung-jae swallowed hard, as if he was already nervous just hearing those words. Jayam-zabak. a cavalry unit selected from a small number of the most elite royal guards in the capital. It was no exaggeration to say that there was no one in Joseon who could move faster than them. In other words, it meant preparing a 5-minute standby team that could rush to the king in an emergency. I will obey your command. Perhaps because he was relieved that he did not have to leave, Sung-jae quickly bowed his head, lest the king change his mind. If you have received your orders, then all of you may leave. And gather quietly in the front yard of this Gangneung Hall tomorrow at exactly my osai. Early the next morning, in front of Gangneung Hall. Something felt awkward. Ji-young kept looking at her perfectly normal limbs, unaccustomed to her unfamiliar appearance. Disguised as a man. It was an unavoidable choice. Traveling a long distance in this era in women's clothing could lead to various troublesome situations, so it would be easier in many ways to disguise herself as a man. Royal cuisine master, you must be safe. That was why she had received help from Jang Jiam, who was skilled with her hands, to put her hair up in a fake topknot and wear a bamboo hat over it. Wearing a jacket over her shirt and carrying a bundle over her shoulder, she looked exactly like a peddler wandering from village to village. Ha! I really don't like this look. At that moment, Yeonsan-gun's figure, who had just appeared in front of Gangneung Hall, came into Ji-young's view. Perhaps it was because she had only ever seen him in his dragon robe, but he looked surprisingly unfamiliar. He was wearing a jade-colored Korean traditional coat with a red sash, and a string of crystal beads that started in front of his ears and hung down to his chin. The face that peeked out from under the large hat was so handsome that he could be called the most handsome man in the world, if one did not know his personality. Why are you staring like that? Is there something on my face? No. It seemed that she had been absent-mindedly staring at the king's face without realizing it. Royal Guard Commander Shin Soo-hyuk was standing next to the king, wearing a navy robe. I saw that figure when I went to the market last time. The hilt of a sword peeked out from inside the Royal Guard Commander's folded arms. If the king's safety was to be guaranteed, that man had to be there. So, just the three of us are leaving. Just as she was thinking that, she noticed someone running towards them in a hurry from afar. A bamboo hat and a red jacket. A drunken clown mask that looked familiar was dangling from the bundle on his back. When his eyes met Ji-young's, that face smiled cheerfully. If she wasn't mistaken. Could it be masked clown Gong-gil? How did you get here? I called him. WWY. Wouldn't it be boring to travel? Then we'll need a clown. Yeonsan-gun wore a proud expression, as if he had come up with a great idea. As if agreeing with his words, Gong-gil pretended to bow like the court officials. Your Majesty, I will do my best to make sure you are never bored. Your role is extremely important. Come to think of it, she had heard about it vaguely after their last meeting. That the clown was wandering around the palace as he pleased, by Yeonsan-gun's special order. But even so. What a bizarre combination. Ji-young looked back and forth between the two men with a dumbfounded expression. Embarking on a secret journey in commoner's clothes, accompanied by a royal cuisine master and a masked clown. It was a combination that was hard to imagine unless the king was extremely eccentric. Whether he knew Ji-young's thoughts or not, the king said without a care. Now that everyone is here, let's depart. Yeonsan-gun and the Royal Guard Commander, both wearing Korean traditional coats and hats, mounted their horses. And Ji-young and Gong-gil, both wearing jackets and bamboo hats, each pulled on the reins. To an outsider, it would look like young masters from a wealthy family were going on an outing to the suburbs with their servants. This strange group of four left the palace and was heading out of the capital. And a mysterious shadow hiding behind the walls of Hanyang watched them for a while before quietly disappearing into the darkness. ****. Madam, another bottle of rice wine here. Oh, that's enough. You'll have to pay from now on. Oh, come on. Why is our madam being like this? Have you ever seen me skip out on a bill? I'll pay off all my debts in a few days, so don't be like that and just give me one more bottle. Humph, get lost. Today was another typical day at the tavern. Taverns in the Joseon Dynasty were a combination of restaurants, bars, inns, and highway rest stops. Therefore, the evening scenery of a tavern located in front of a mountain pass was always crowded with travelers who wanted to eat or stay overnight before crossing the pass. But what's the point of traveling around like this every day? It's so hard to make a living. It's all because the king is incompetent. Always feasting on delicacies and womanizing. Hey, keep your voice down. Am I wrong? Frankly speaking, with the Chaihong and Cloud Peace, the state of the palace these days is the reason why the saying flourishing clear came about. This man is drunk. The drunkards, already flushed with alcohol, were spouting whatever came to their minds. And sitting right next to them, eating soup and listening to their words, was none other than Yeonsan-gun and his party. They had heard rumors that a group of commoners was wandering around the Yangju area of Gyeonggi province and had come all the way here to find clues. Besides, they're driving people out by setting up hunting grounds with restricted areas in Yangju, Paju, Gwangju, and Gimpo. Does that even make sense? I think there's going to be a riot soon. I wonder what will happen in the future. As the drunkard's words grew increasingly harsh, the royal guard commander, unable to bear it any longer, gripped the hilt of his sword tightly, but Yeonsan-gun, who was drinking rice wine, waved his hand. Leave them be. What will change even if they complain all day long? More than that, this soup is more edible than I thought. It's kind of rough, but it has an honest taste. Even in this situation, Yeonsan-gun seemed to like the tavern's beef and rice soup, which he was eating for the first time, and was even giving it a taste review. It has a different taste from the sianantang that we eat after the sianandan ceremony. I'm glad I came out. Looking at him, it seemed clear that he had come out to find out what delicious things the people were eating without his knowledge. At that moment, the lively atmosphere of the tavern suddenly became as quiet as if cold water had been poured over it. A group of unfamiliar men who did not look like travelers had entered without warning. Their hair was tied up haphazardly, and their faces were scarred. They were ruffians with menacing looks who could not be mistaken for ordinary people. Moreover, each of them was holding a blue blade in their hands. Have you heard of the Kalbongsan murderous gang? I'm Cheon Dal-sam, the leader. You probably know that even the government's soldiers run away with their tails between their legs when they see my face. The burly man who appeared to be the leader sat down on the platform in the middle of the tavern and continued to spout words that were somewhere between a threat and a joke. But if you get to know me, you'll see that I'm a soft man, so don't worry. Just put your valuables gently, in here, okay? Following him, his subordinates went around with burlap sacks, collecting valuables and coins. The tavern, which had been so lively, was now filled with silence. Oh, come on, ladies, don't be scared and just keep drinking. But if you do anything stupid, you'll die, so let's all be careful, okay? The bandit leader Cheon Dal-sam was acting so nonchalantly. At that moment, a couple of the ruffians, who had been looking around at Yeonsan-gun's party sitting in the corner, shouted as loudly as if they were ginseng diggers who had discovered wild ginseng. Ha! What's this? There are some expensive guys here? Wow, it looks like some young masters from Hanyang? Leader! Take a look here. This could be worth some money? As he watched the ruffians giggling among themselves, a strange smile began to spread across Yeonsan-gun's face. Chapter 27. Strolling Incognito, 2. Egu, what brings our cute little Hanyang masters to a place like this? Looks like they wandered into the wrong Jiseing house. Facing the bandits who were exchanging jokes and snickering amongst themselves, Royal Guard Captain Shin Soo-hyuk gave Yeonsan-gun a look that pleaded for a command. He looked ready to draw his sword and wipe them out in an instant, if only the order were given. But instead of giving a command, Yeonsan-gun nonchalantly munched on his rice soup and finished the remaining bowl of rough rice wine. Then, without even glancing at them, he took out a bundle of coins from his sleeve and threw it onto the dirt floor of the tavern. Take what's enough and leave without harming anyone. Cheon Dal-sam, the bandit leader, who had been watching the scene with an absurd look, approached Yeonsan-gun, brought his face close, and made a phlegmy sound. Hey, sis. What did you say just now? I said, take that and get your ugly face out of here. Cheon Dal-sam's face gradually contorted at the cold tone, without even a glance in his direction. Cheon Dal-sam took out a sharp dagger from his chest and held it up threateningly. Does this sis have, like, multiple lives or something? That's what I want to say to you. Yeonsan-gun said nonchalantly, draining the remaining rough rice wine. After a moment of bewildered expression at the unexpected words, Cheon Dal-sam suddenly burst into hearty laughter. Wow, this sis has a unique sense of humor. Hilarious. As Cheon Dal-sam started laughing, the other bandits also began to snicker and laugh along. It was an attempt to hide their momentary embarrassment and appear relaxed. However, seeing the drunken clown mask even sneering at his Korean traditional coat, Cheon Dal-sam slowly began to feel like he was being made a fool of. Laughing? You're laughing in this situation? Does this sis really want to see a corpse? As Cheon Dal-sam's voice grew rough, Shin Soo-hyuk's hand, who had been watching the scene, slowly moved to the hilt of his sword. At that moment, one of the bandits next to Ji-young shouted loudly as if he had discovered something. Hey, Captain, come over here and take a look. This one smells a bit different, don't you think? Cheon Dal-sam, who had been glaring at Yeonsan-gun for a while, slowly turned his gaze and strode towards Ji-young. Then, he brought his dirty face close and began to sniff around. This is definitely a woman's scent. Cheon Dal-sam grabbed Ji-young's chin roughly, lifted her head, and examined her from side to side. Come to think of it, her face is too pretty. Ugh. Ji-young frowned as if a bug had touched her face, but Cheon Dal-sam, undeterred, rolled his bestial eyes. Well, there's a simple way to confirm. As soon as he finished speaking, Cheon Dal-sam suddenly grabbed Ji-young's jacket roughly. Kaya dash. Ji-young was startled and clutched at her collar with both hands, but it seemed that Cheon Dal-sam had already caught the scream that had just burst out. He, so it's a woman after all? Cheon Dal-sam revealed his missing front teeth and gave a grotesque smile. At that moment, a cold voice suddenly came from behind. Hey, ugly bastard. Which bastard is? What flew into his eyes as he turned around, angered by the word ugly, was a earthenware pot filled with rice soup. Crash! The earthenware pot shattered as it hit Cheon Dal-sam's head, and the hot soup inside flowed down his face. Quiet! Whether it was the pain of being hit by the earthenware pot, the heat of being burned by the boiling soup, or both, Cheon Dal-sam screamed and began to roll on the floor. The person who struck his head with the earthenware pot was none other than Yeonsan-gun. Although he had a faint smile on his lips, his eyes were already filled with anger. This guy has no fear. Seeing their leader collapse and writhe on the floor, 4 or 5 of his subordinates hurriedly raised their weapons. Eat this! The moment one of the men at the forefront raised his weapon and charged, a metallic flash streaked past his eyes. At the spot where the flash stopped, Royal Guard Captain Shin Soo-hyuk, who had already drawn his sword, was taking his stance. Leopard head stance. The fastest movement among the 24 stances of Joseon swordsmanship. Next is your head. At Soo-hyuk's chilling words, the bandit who had just attempted to attack finally discovered the blade lying on the floor. The middle of the hilt he was holding had been cleanly cut off in an instant. Key cake? Startled by the sharpness, he fell to the floor, and the remaining bandits, terrified, began to step back cautiously. You. There were 5 bandits remaining, and only one opponent. However, despite their numerical advantage, the bandits, sensing that it would not be an easy fight, exchanged glances and quickly adopted a different strategy. Eat this. One of them quickly ran up, grabbed someone, and held a blue-edged blade to their neck. A despicable tactic to threaten with a hostage. And the hostage who was grabbed by the bandit and had a knife to their neck was none other than Ji Young. If you don't drop your sword right now, this girl will be seeing the afterlife. Ji Young suddenly felt dizzy. It was inevitable, as she had suddenly been taken hostage by a bandit and had a knife to her throat. TCH. In this situation, Royal Guard Captain Shin Soo-hyuk, who had drawn his sword, could not move recklessly. There was a risk that the royal cuisine master Ji Young's life could be in danger. Feeling troubled, he turned his head slightly to gauge his lord's reaction, but Yeonsan-gun, on the other hand, was showing an expression as if he didn't care. Do as you please. What? I said, kill her or let her live, do as you please. But one thing is for sure, know this, afterwards, not a single one of you will be left alive. It was a nonchalant tone, but his eyes held a bizarre madness. I will kill each and every one of you so painfully that you will regret being born, so be warned. What kind of guy is this? Faced with this, it was the bandits who were rather taken aback. Looking at those mad eyes, it was clear that he wasn't just bluffing. Moreover, threats wouldn't work on someone who wouldn't regret killing a hostage. So, in the end, there were only 2 options, retreat as they were, or fight to the finish. Such a tense standoff continued for a while. Takta Duraroruriu. Suddenly, a masked clown mask rolled between them. A drunken clown mask painted in red. Following it, a tall man wearing a red vest came in, picked up the masked clown mask. Oh dear, how did this masked clown mask roll all the way over here, my goodness. The man who picked up the mask, Gong-gil, gave a hearty smile that didn't fit the situation, looked around, and suddenly blurted out something out of the blue. But aren't you done with your business yet? What kind of nonsense is this? In a situation where they were already tense and facing off, what kind of clueless remark was this? Just as the angry bandits' gazes were about to focus on Gong-gil, a hurried voice suddenly flew in from somewhere. Let's go back. The one who shouted those words was Cheon Dalsam, the leader of the Kalbongsan Saliakji, who was lying face down with his face all red from the hot rice soup. Leader? What are you talking about all of a sudden? Let's go back quickly. Just follow me quickly, you bastards. Before he could even finish his words properly, Cheon Dalsam darted out of the tavern. The remaining bandits seemed to be standing there dumbfounded for a while, but soon they fled one by one, without even properly gathering their valuables. Are you hurt anywhere? After the bandits left, Yeonsan-gun asked Ji Young, who was clutching her collar and calming her startled heart, in a nonchalant manner. I am fine. It's nothing. She said that, but Ji Young still couldn't shake the trembling from her whole body. Not only had she overcome countless near-death experiences, but now she had even had a gang of bandits holding a blue blade to her throat. Moreover, Yeonsan-gun had clearly said a moment ago that he didn't care whether she lived or died. If she were to think positively, it might have been a means to escape the crisis. As expected, that man is a psychopath who can't be trusted. Narrowing her eyes, Ji Young only reaffirmed her firm conclusion. Unexpectedly, however, Yeonsan-gun was handing a bundle of coins to the tavern owner, who was crouching in the corner and trembling. Take this money and clean up the mess. Could it be that Yeonsan-gun was showing compassion to the people? As the tavern owner cautiously examined the situation and picked up the bundle of coins, Yeonsan-gun continued. Report to the government office when it gets light, but do not utter a single word about our group of 4. If you do, your body will not be safe. Do you understand me?" The tavern owner nodded hastily with a terrified face. There was a reason why Yeonsan-gun was acting that way. If the tavern owner were to reveal the presence of Yeonsan-gun's group in plain clothes at the scene to the government office, the government's pursuit would surely follow. If that happened, a situation might arise where Yeonsan-gun's identity would have to be revealed, and then the meaning of going on a secret excursion to avoid the eyes of the court officials would be lost. Of course. In the end, it's to silence them. Indeed, there was no way that the infamous Yeonsan-gun would act with pure altruism without any self-interest. Anyway, even if he had silenced the tavern owner for now, they couldn't stay here any longer, as an incident had occurred that could involve the government. Yeonsan-gun gave the order without delay. "We will cross the pass tonight and move on. We will rest after that." It wasn't a full moon, but the quiet moonlight was enough to illuminate the night pass. Yeonsan-gun and Ji Young were on horseback, and the clown troupe Gong-gil and Royal Guard Captain Shin Soo-hyuk were holding the reins. Compared to when they first departed from the palace, Soo-hyuk and Ji Young's positions had been reversed. "Royal Guard Captain, I'm sorry. I should be the one leading the horse." "No. How can a man let a woman walk and ride the horse?" "During the day, we had to do it that way because of the eyes of others, but at night, this is the right thing to do." Indeed, the current appearance looked a bit strange. A person wearing a bamboo hat was riding the horse, and a person wearing a Korean traditional coat was leading the horse. Well, what's right is right. I'll be seeing all sorts of bizarre sights. Gong-gil, who was leading the horse next to him, grumbled to himself as if he didn't like something. "Hey! Watch your words. His Majesty has also permitted it." "Hoo-hoo, then why are you taking credit for His Majesty's command? Do you really want to die? I told you to shut your mouth." Yes, I understand." Soo-hyuk watched Gong-gil's back as he received the words in a twisted manner, as if his mood was soured. In fact, there were more than 1 or 2 questionable points. A mysterious clown troupe who suddenly came to live in the palace, even though it was His Majesty's command. Come to think of it, the first time he met him was when he encountered the clown troupe in the marketplace. Moreover, wasn't it that drunken clown mask who blocked his attack with a single hand at that time? Although it was a brief moment, his movements were definitely not those of an ordinary person. Furthermore, the bandits of Kalbongsan ran away just by looking at the masked clown mask in the marketplace? No matter how he thought about it, it was difficult to understand. As Soo-hyuk glanced sideways, he saw that His Majesty, who was riding the horse, was nodding off and dozing. If he didn't take this opportunity, there wouldn't be many chances to talk openly with that masked clown. "Hey, clown troupe. Why are you calling me again? I'm tired to death. Who are you?" Gong-gil, who received the sudden question, turned to Soo-hyuk without a word and gave a strange smile. "Who am I? I'm a clown troupe. Why did those bandits run away earlier? You can't deceive my eyes, so tell me the truth." At Soo-hyuk's cold gaze, Gong-gil sighed lightly as if he couldn't help it and began to speak. "Do you know what a clown troupe means? The character Guang means wide, and the character Day means big. The widest and biggest thing in this Joseon land is a clown troupe. So, that means we've been everywhere in the 8 provinces. Continue. As we've been sticking around here and there, we've got a lot of entanglements. We owe a lot to organizations like the Gulsan Sword Fraternity and the Yuri-san Monk Brigade, and we have a lot to receive as well. So? Think about it. If you mess with those guys, wouldn't you have a headache? Whether it's favors or grudges, they'll all come after you." Gong-gil pointed to the drunken clown mask on his head and continued. My father was the leader of our clown troupe. You noblemen may not know it well, but he's a legendary figure among us clown troupe. This drunken clown mask is my father's relic. He wandered around as a clown troupe his whole life, so how many people would be involved with this masked clown mask? So that's why the bandits retreated when they saw it? Believe it or not, it often works. It wasn't a satisfactory answer, but since he had heard the answer, there was no point in questioning him further. It was at this moment. Shoo! Soo-hyuk said in a low voice, bringing his finger to his lips. What's wrong? The group all stopped walking. Without a word, Soo-hyuk cautiously pointed to a corner in the bushes with his finger. What could be seen there were two huge eyes shining in the moonlight. The low growl of an animal echoed eerily in the forest. Chapter 28. Strolling Incognito, 3. The horses were the first to panic. Perhaps it was due to the instinctive fear of encountering an overwhelming predator. The ground was soon soaked with the horses' urine. Why are they suddenly acting like this? They've never done this before. Get off the horses, quickly. Your Majesty, please, hurry. Yeonsan-gun and Ji-young, startled awake by the commotion, hastily dismounted. The horses began to thrash about, becoming increasingly uncontrollable. Neigh! Snap! As soon as the reins snapped, two of the horses bolted forward. And then, it was at that moment that a mysterious figure, its eyes gleaming in the bushes, burst out with incredible speed. Krong! The horse lagging behind was struck in the neck by something that suddenly appeared. Crack! With a dull sound of breaking bones, the horse's thick neck twisted at an unnatural angle, and it collapsed to the ground. Meanwhile, the other horse galloped away, quickly disappearing from sight. The King Yeonsan-gun's means of transportation had vanished in an instant. The dark shadow that had killed a horse with a single blow emerged from the bushes and slowly turned its head towards Yeonsan-gun and his party, as if searching for its next target. What is that thing? Royal Guard Shin Soo-hyuk quickly drew his saber. The metallic clang seemed to have sharply stimulated the creature's nerves. Krong! With a chilling cry, the bizarre figure raised its front paws and began to stand upright on its two hind legs. It grew taller, easily twice the height of a man. The shadow, stretched long by the moonlight, had grown long enough to cover Yeonsan-gun and his party. The master of this mountain, it was this thing. As Gong-gil finished speaking, the moonlight, just emerging from the clouds, fully illuminated the creature's massive body. A beast with dark red fur, standing on 2 feet. A massive bear, so large that it would take 3 or 4 grown men to encircle it with their arms. It's a brown bear. A sacred animal that shouldn't be harmed carelessly. Gong-gil, who seemed to know everything about the world outside the palace walls, added succinctly. Kri-o-hong. The brown bear's thunderous roar echoed through the moonlit forest. Its overwhelming presence seemed to make even the animals and plants of the mountain tremble. But then, how fascinating. I've never seen such a large bear before. It's quite precious. Incredibly, Yeonsan-gun, in this situation, wore an expression of admiration, as if he had discovered a rare spectacle. But the bear's red eyes gleamed like those of a wild beast hunting its prey. Why, Your Majesty? It's dangerous. Please step back. Soo-hyuk stood in front of Yeonsan-gun, raising his saber and taking a defensive stance. But Gong-gil seemed to sense something strange about the brown bear. Something's not right. Unless its territory is being invaded, a bear wouldn't attack a group of humans first. What nonsense are you spouting? It's just a beast, Jester. The more of a beast it is, the more thoroughly it protects its territory. Overstepping one's bounds is something only humans do. Gong-gil retorted sharply to Soo-hyuk's interruption. To the nobles who learned about the world through books, he might seem insignificant, but to Gong-gil, who had experienced the world firsthand while wandering the 8 provinces, beasts were far more trustworthy than humans. But still, it's trying to attack us right now, isn't it? Ji Young, who had been listening quietly from behind, spoke with a realistic tone. Whatever the reason, they needed to escape this crisis first. Then, Ji Young noticed Yeonsan-gun striding towards the massive brown bear. "Kneel, beast." "Why, Your Majesty? What are you doing? All the mountains, fields, rivers, and seas of this nation belong to me. And you, the beast that lives there, are the same. So, won't you kneel before me?" "That crazy bastard." Nausea rose in Ji Young's throat. "Your Majesty, you're in danger." Suhyok cried out urgently, but Yeonsan-gun ignored him and continued to scold the bear. "Furthermore, killing my beloved horse is an unforgivable crime. Know your sin." There was no way the bear could understand those words. "Kreo Hong." The brown bear, foaming at the mouth like a rabid dog, roared and then charged madly towards Yeonsan-gun. "Your Majesty! It's dangerous." Without realizing it, Ji Young quickly reached into the satchel she wore slung across her shoulder. It was a place to store simple snacks to eat while traveling. She felt something round at her fingertips. "See, this is." It was a traditional confection called umigi, made by kneading glutinous rice flour into dumplings, frying them in oil, and coating them with honey or syrup. Jang Jia made this from dawn because the king shouldn't run out of energy. "Oh, well, here goes nothing." Ji Young grabbed what she could and threw it at the bear with all her might. A piece of omigi, about the size of a child's fist, flew towards the bear's massive face and collided with it. Thwack! Of course, it didn't have much of an impact. But surprisingly, the bear suddenly slowed down and began sniffing, its attention drawn to the omigi that had fallen to the ground. Just as I thought. It's attracted to the honey on the surface. If the beast had been a feline animal like a tiger, leopard, or wildcat, the story would have been different. Feline animals are genetically unable to taste sweetness. But a bear is an omnivore like humans, it can't help but love sweet things. Sweetness is the taste of sugar, that is, carbohydrates. Carnivorous feline animals don't need to obtain nutrients from carbohydrates, so they don't need to taste sweetness either. But bears are different. The omnivore can not only taste the sweetness of carbohydrates, but it also loves it to the point of obsession. Especially in seasons like this, when it has just emerged from hibernation and needs to replenish its nutrients as much as possible. As if to prove it, the bear used its sensitive sense of smell to sniff around and quickly find a piece of omigi, which it swallowed in one gulp. But the real trouble happened right after that. The bear suddenly raised its head and made eye contact with Ji Young. Ha! Why is it suddenly looking at me? Only then did Ji Young realize that her satchel was full of omigi. Perhaps it had noticed the smell, because the brown bear suddenly charged towards Ji Young with terrifying force. I have to get this off quickly." Ji Young frantically began to untie the bundle tied around her shoulder. But in her panicked state, her fingers wouldn't move as she wanted them to. Damn it! Just when she thought she was done for, a figure suddenly darted past Ji Young like the wind. It was Gong-gil, dressed in a red Korean traditional coat. The sharply honed blade of his sword reflected the moonlight, shining brightly. It was a so-called bamboo cane sword. A cane sword whose blade resembled an iris leaf, commonly called an iris sword. The bamboo cane that Gong-gil carried among his belongings was apparently a weapon for self-defense, with a blade hidden inside. "Step back!" With a shout, Gong-gil tilted his blade and slipped into the bear's side, as if sliding, and plunged the blade into the bear's flank. Thwack! However, the feeling of the sword against his hand was dull. He could instinctively tell that he hadn't inflicted a fatal wound, blocked by the thick hide and layer of fat. Before the bear's front paw could make its next attack, Gong-gil didn't try to be greedy and pulled out his sword, tumbling away. For now, saving that strange woman was the priority. He had accomplished his immediate goal. Thanks to him, the bear's attention, which had been focused on Ji Young, now began to be drawn to Gong-gil. Who, that jester? He's quite skilled. Shin Su-hyuk couldn't help but admire Gong-gil's agile movements. Although he hadn't inflicted much damage due to the thick bear hide, his ability to quickly enter, attack, and retreat was flawlessly executed. Then, a thought suddenly flashed through Su-hyuk's mind. If I could cooperate with that jester, we might be able to take it down. Of course, cooperation was only possible if they were in sync, which wouldn't be easy. But Su-hyuk judged that it was worth a try, given his skill. Hey, jester, now that things have come to this, draw its attention just one more time. I'll use that opportunity to cut off its windpipe. It's not like you're in a position to order me around. Gong-gil retorted gruffly, as if displeased, but when he saw the rampaging bear again, he couldn't help but admit that he had no other choice. All right. The opportunity won't last long, so don't miss it. Before Gong-gil could finish speaking, the brown bear roared again and charged. Through the gaps between its front paws, which were slashing through the air, Gong-gil darted in like lightning. Then, he deeply stabbed the bear's rear thigh with his sword. Thwack! Krong! Now that a sword was stuck in its leg, it wouldn't be able to move as nimbly as before. Now! As Gong-gil's words fell, Su-hyuk's navy robe flew like the wind. From within, the sharp blade of his saber was aimed precisely at the bear's neck, plunging down like an arrow. Lifting the cauldron. The most powerful attack in Joseon swordsmanship. A large downward slash from above. Swish! Su-hyuk's saber sliced through the side of the bear's neck in an instant. From start to finish, it was a picture-perfect collaboration. It landed perfectly. A faint smile appeared on Su-hyuk's lips. However, Kreo Hong. Despite being struck accurately in the neck, the bear once again swung its front paws, unleashing a barrage of attacks. TCH. He raised his sword to block the sharp claws, but the force of the swinging paw sent Su-hyuk flying. If he hadn't managed to regain his balance in the air, he would have fallen to the ground. The bear's hide and flesh seemed to be much thicker than usual. That's true, and something strange. There's no reason for it to be attacking so desperately. Gong-gil tilted his head, as if puzzled by the bear's persistent attacks. He didn't know the reason, but it was clear that this wouldn't end easily. It had become clear that it would be difficult to inflict fatal damage on the massive beast with Gong-gil's cane sword or Su-hyuk's saber. Then, when capturing a sacred animal, one needs an appropriate tool, wouldn't you say? At the sudden voice, Gong-gil, Su-hyuk, and Ji Young turned around. Standing there was none other than Yeonsan-gun. In one hand, he held a massive sword that was a full 5 feet, about 150 centimeters, long, almost reaching his shoulder height. Ha! That is... Ji Young, who had come from the modern era, had seen that sword somewhere before. She vaguely remembered seeing it in an illustration in the corner of a history textbook, thanks to its unique appearance with a large dragon carved into the hilt. That, could it be, the royal sword of King Taejo? Shin Su-hyuk, his eyes wide, muttered in a groan. King Taejo's royal sword, the sword that Yi Seong-gye himself wielded when he struck down King Yu of Goryeo. In other words, a treasure passed down through the royal family for generations. Why is a treasure that should be in the royal treasury here? I brought it myself, just in case. Come to think of it, there was something unusually large wrapped in cloth among the various supplies carried on the horses. She had thought it was something used to set up tents or beds. He brought a royal treasure? Ji Young's bewilderment was interrupted. Krong! The bear, foaming at the mouth, was preparing to charge again. As Yeonsan-gun slowly drew the magnificent sword, the blue gleam of the blade reflected the moonlight, flashing brightly. A king must be killed by a king. I will behead the king of this mountain. With a strange smile, Yeonsan-gun gripped the massive royal sword with both hands and slowly raised it above his head. Chapter 29. I shall personally sever the neck of that wild beast. The man was holding up Taejo's royal sword, a treasure of the royal family. Being this self-willed is really a living cultural asset. However, it wasn't entirely impossible. With that massive sword, he might actually be able to cut off the bear's head. In that instant, another question immediately popped into Ji Young's head. Does that man even know how to use a sword? Royal Cuisine Master. Throw the snacks from the satchel at it. Ha! Snapping out of it at Yeonsan-gun's shout, Ji Young realized the bear was charging straight at her. Regaining her composure, Ji Young grabbed the strap on her shoulder and hurled the entire bundle at the bear. Thud! The bundle hit the bear's face, and the snacks inside, like UME cookies, scattered onto the ground. At the same time, the sweet honey scent coating the snacks wafted into the air. Perhaps due to its highly developed sense of smell, Ji Young clearly saw the bear falter momentarily at the scent. Royal Guard Shin Suhyok, Gong-gil. Now! No sooner had the words left his mouth than a red overcoat and a navy robe flew out from either side like projectiles. In an instant, two blades plunged deep into the bear's flanks. This wouldn't kill the massive brown bear, but it would hold it in place for a moment. Krah! Letting out a roar that seemed to shake the heavens, the brown bear heaved its massive body upright. The force of its desperate struggle was so great that the two men who had plunged their swords into the bear's body had their feet lifted off the ground. At this rate, those two are in danger. Just as Ji Young thought that, what caught her eye was His Majesty, silhouetted against the moonlight, leaping with a massive sword raised high. How dare you! And a metallic flash plunged down vertically like a thunderbolt. Flash! The instant Yeonsan-gun's feet lightly touched the ground. At the same time, the bear's massive body collapsed as if a giant tree had fallen. Thud! A great reverberation shook the entire mountain like an earthquake. It was the sound announcing the end of the most magnificent creature in this mountain, the brown bear. Your Majesty, is your body unharmed? Royal Guard Shin Suhyok rushed over in a flurry, but Yeonsan-gun paid him no heed. He simply stared at the fallen bear with a look of awe. Finally! I can fulfill another one of my dreams. Your Majesty? Now that I have obtained such magnificent bear paws. Bear paws, you mean? The finest ingredient that even the ancient sage Mencius so loved. And from a bear of this size, it must be the highest quality. What do you think, Royal Cuisine Master? At those words, Ji Young was momentarily speechless. Bear paws. Specifically, the left front paw of the bear. One of the 8 delicacies, a term for 8 rare and precious foods, and a symbol of rare cuisine that often appeared in stories from the spring and autumn period, was this very bear paw. So, there was no doubt that the bear paws of this massive brown bear were the finest ingredients. Could it be that the king fearlessly approached the bear from the start, aiming for the bear paws? While Ji Young was wearing a dumbfounded expression, Gong-gil, who was putting his bamboo sword back into its scabbard, casually tossed out a comment. Well, I roughly guessed, but it's as I thought. Ha! His Majesty. His skill in performing the Kyoyangma was, even to my eyes, which have made a living as a clown my whole life, top-notch. It's not for nothing that they say dance and martial arts are connected. I roughly guessed that he would have some knowledge of swordsmanship. They danced together like that every morning. It seemed Gong-gil had already grasped the king's nature to some extent. Is that how it works? Besides, from what I've observed, His Majesty is a person who exerts twice his strength when there's something he wants to eat. Ah. Yes. At this point, there was nothing more about His Majesty that could surprise her. He was a man whose every action was marked by eccentric behavior that defied common sense. So, that meant the king, who had set out on a secret excursion in disguise, met a massive bear, and with the single-minded determination to eat bear paw cuisine, took up Isongji's sword, a treasure of the royal family, and personally cut down and captured the bear. But, it seems there's something even stranger going on. Gongil strode up to the fallen bear and began to feel around the back of its massive head with his hands. What are you doing now? Just as Ji Young was wondering about Gongil's strange behavior. As I thought. Gongil pulled something out from the back of the bear's head. It was a large needle that looked to be at least a handspan in length. This was stuck in the back of the bear's head. In humans, that would be the aphasia point. Shin Soo-hyuk, who had been silently watching the scene from the side, added a comment. It's an acupoint that controls the heat going to the head. With such a large needle stuck in that spot, it's no wonder its aggression and appetite were soaring like crazy. Then the fact that the bear suddenly attacked us was also. Hearing that, several suspicious points seemed to be explained. From the bear's abnormally aggressive behavior to its overly sensitive reaction to the scent of the snacks Ji Young had thrown. Who on earth would do such a cruel thing? One thing is certain, this large needle couldn't have gotten stuck here on its own. As Shin Soo-hyuk opened his mouth with a grim expression, a heavy silence descended for a moment. If that were the case, it meant that someone had deliberately stuck the large needle into the bear to make it attack the group. If so, it was a chillingly terrifying scheme. If they were attacked by a bear during a secret excursion, there would be no evidence left of any assassination attempt. In that case, we can only assume that information is leaking from the palace. Soo-hyuk wrapped the large needle in a cloth and tucked it into his chest, his thick eyebrows twitching. Clearly, someone threatening His Majesty's safety is hiding nearby. It was at that moment that they sensed movement nearby. Who goes there? Royal Guard Shin Soo-hyuk barked, drawing his saber like lightning. No sooner had the words left his mouth than a torch appeared from the darkness. No, not just 1, 2, 3, 4. Before they knew it, the number of torches visible around them began to increase rapidly. It didn't take long for Yeonsan-gun's group to realize that they were completely surrounded by people holding torches. Asterisk. Saejingjin Hall, Gyeongbok Palace. His Majesty is unwell and will not be holding court for the time being, so please submit your agenda in writing. Bearing the brunt of the officials' cold gazes, Royal Secretary Sung-jae personally locked the doors of the throne room. Sung-jae's role in the court was to thoroughly conceal the king's absence, who had left on a secret excursion, from the eyes of the high-ranking officials. Sung-jae could vaguely sense why Yeonsan-gun had personally set out on a secret excursion in disguise. There is someone in this court who is trying to find the sealed box before His Majesty. If that object fell into the wrong hands, a terrible bloodbath would surely ensue. Since it was not uncommon for His Majesty to be absent for several days for hunting or excursions, all he could do was hope that His Majesty would safely find the sealed box while he bought time by making excuses. And there was another important task assigned to him. Director General. When did you arrive? A man with a gray face was standing behind Sung-jae, having somehow entered. Director General Park Won-jong. A man who exuded a cold, sharp aura like a blade just by his presence. Perhaps it was because he was a martial arts laureate and the strongest martial artist in Joseon, recognized by all. Or perhaps it was his nature. At the age of 35, he had risen to the position of Director General, a second-rank military officer at the pinnacle of Joseon's military affairs, and he also commanded the Jyeomsabok, said to be Joseon's elite guard. From the aura he exuded, he could not be an ordinary person. I heard that His Majesty has left on a secret excursion. Director General Park Won-jong's low voice, close to a metallic rasp, naturally carried an air of intimidation that overwhelmed the other party. Trying not to be intimidated by that aura, Sung Jae responded with an effort to appear calm. He ordered me not to tell anyone. However, he ordered the Director General to personally lead the Jeonsan-gun and prepare for departure. The Director General stood there for a moment, thinking. If it was for the safety of His Majesty alone, the Royal Guard would be sufficient. Park Won-jong himself knew very well what it meant that he had been ordered to prepare the Jeonsan-gun. I shall obey the command. Sung Jae turned his head at the cold voice, but Director General Park Won-jong was already gone. Yeonsan-gun's group was surrounded by people holding torches. In their hands, they each held crude farming tools such as sickles and plows. They were dressed in ragged peasant clothes, but their faces were full of sharp wariness. Who are you people? Who are you people? To Shin Soo-hyuk's question, which was laced with hostility, the strangers retorted without hiding their wariness. It seemed that they would have to explain first for the situation to progress. We are travelers passing through. We have no intention of causing unnecessary trouble. Then what is the reason for you people carrying weapons? If you look at that fallen beast over there, it might explain things a bit. At Soo-hyuk's gesture, a large and small murmur arose among the torch-bearing crowd that had gathered to see the massive bear. After a while, the oldest-looking person in the group stepped forward. I am the village chief of a mountain village near here. The thing is, since last night, the brown bear, a sacred animal of the mountain, has turned ferocious and has been attacking people. For that reason, I gathered the able-bodied men of the village to catch it. If that's the case, you don't have to worry. We've already caught it. At Soo-hyuk's words, the old man looked at the fallen bear once more and nodded. Our people were prepared to be injured, but thanks to you, we've been spared a great deal of worry. I am truly grateful. The old man bowed politely, expressing his gratitude. It's already late at night, and if you are travelers passing through this mountain, how about staying in our village until morning and then departing? We don't have much to offer in return, but we can provide a place to avoid the night dew and a simple breakfast. He seemed to have noticed the state of Yeonsangun's group, who were exhausted from fighting the bear. When Soo-hyuk turned around and asked for permission, Yeonsan-gun yawned and nodded. Well, I'll need a kitchen to cook the bear paws. Let's go to the village quickly. Again, even in this situation, he was talking about those bear paws. Ji-young couldn't help but sigh. But when she thought about it, they hadn't rested properly since the commotion at the tavern and had been walking ever since, so they needed a place to stay somewhere. Moreover, they had lost their horses in the bear attack. It was already difficult to carry their luggage, such as food and weapons. Once we enter the village, maybe a solution will arise. Ji-young had no choice but to have such hopeful expectations. A mountain village located somewhere on the border between Gyeonggi Province and Gangwon Province. Ji-young, who had spent the night and woken up early in the morning, slowly took a walk around the village. The land was more barren than she had thought, and the villagers' livelihoods were more impoverished than she had expected. Even if the soil isn't fertile, I didn't expect the standard of living to be this poor. The village chief had given up his own house to treat the guests, and they had been able to sleep well without being cold last night because he had stoked the fire in the stove. Moreover, he had even heated bathwater for them in the evening, so it was fortunate for Ji-young that she was able to wash herself for the first time in a long time. But that was all. The only thing that stood out in this mountain village, which she had looked around the next morning, was the trace of severe poverty. The houses were all bark houses with roofs made of tree bark. Even rice straw was precious in mountain villages where rice farming was not possible. All that was served for breakfast was dark buckwheat porridge with soy sauce and a few seasoned wild vegetables. It's such a poor village that I'm ashamed that there's nothing to offer. The village chief, an old man who had served the meal, trailed off as if he was embarrassed. Gong Gil spoke up cheerfully. "Oh, what are you saying? This is a feast. I'll enjoy the meal. Then, I'll gratefully accept it." Shin Suhyak also expressed his gratitude stiffly and picked up his spoon. A girl who looked to be about 17 or 18, who seemed to be the old man's granddaughter, smiled bashfully at the sight. So, the only one who was sulking in that place was Yeonsan-gun. Did I not say that I would eat bear paws? Well, they're currently being boiled in the kitchen, but it's a dish that takes a lot of time to cook. It doesn't matter. I will wait. Originally, delicacies are best enjoyed after waiting. Ha! She didn't know he would throw a tantrum about food even after coming all the way here. He really was an annoying person. Then do as you please, we'll eat first. Ji Young said that and picked up her spoon, but at that moment, a hurried voice was heard from outside. A villager had come to find the village chief, panting for breath. "Village chief, something terrible has happened." "What is it?" The village chief, who had opened the old paper door and stuck out only his upper body, saw the face of the villager, who was sweating profusely. "A clerk has come from the district office. He says today is the last day to pay the defense tax." Ji Young could instantly sense the village chief's expression hardening to an ashen color. Chapter 30, Corrupt Officials, 1. Ahem. With a deliberate clearing of his throat, as if to announce his presence, a man with a catfish mustache, wearing a narrow-brimmed gat, walked into the courtyard of the village chief's bark-roofed house. His swaggering gait was unpleasant to look at. Li Bang, clerk, what brings you here in person?" Ignoring the villagers who stood anxiously, paling with fear, the catfish mustache immediately roared at the village chief. "Hey, village chief! When are you going to pay back the defense tax money?" Li Bang, clerk. If you could just give us a little more time." The village chief rushed out into the yard and bowed so low he was almost groveling, but the catfish mustache's eyes remained cold. "Every time, it's wait, give us more time. Does the village chief think the defense tax is a joke, defense tax?" Even Ji Young, a modern person, had heard the word in Korean history class. In Ji Young's memory, the word was never used alone in textbooks. It usually appeared mixed with other words, and the most frequent combination was the expression, "the evils of defense tax." It was said to be a representative evil law of the early Joseon Dynasty. Ji Young vaguely recalled her knowledge of the tax system of the Joseon Dynasty. Tax payment in the Joseon Dynasty was largely divided into three categories. Tribute, labor, tax were the three. First, tribute was a tax levied on land. The people had to pay a certain amount of grain as tax, depending on the size and quality of the land they owned. Second, labor was an obligation levied on people. The people had to perform military service or provide labor for public works such as building fortresses and reservoirs. Third, tax was a tax levied on households. They had to offer local specialties produced in the area to the country as tribute goods. None of them were easy burdens for the people, but the third, tax, or tribute goods, was particularly problematic. I think it was often the case that the actual products produced in the area did not match the items that had to be offered as tribute goods. Ji Young cautiously asked the village chief's granddaughter, who was looking anxiously outside. "What are the tribute goods imposed on this village?" "Pardon? What do you have to offer to the government office that they're acting so violently?" "There are many, but the most difficult to obtain is abalone." "What? What did you say? That abalone that's harvested from the sea?" As soon as she heard that, she burst out laughing in disbelief. Where in the world would abalone come from in this remote mountain village that lived by slash-and-burn farming? Abalone was added to our village's tribute goods after the new prefect took office. What happens if you can't offer the abalone? Yeonsan-gun, who had been listening silently, slowly opened his mouth. There was a subtle anger in his voice. The village chief's granddaughter shook her head and waved her hands as if she couldn't even imagine it. If we can't offer the tribute goods, we'll be dragged to the government office and flogged half to death. But we can't go anywhere to get abalone, so we have no choice but to use defense tax, payment for defense. This is where the expedient called defense tax came in. The act of a broker, so-called defense tax agent, paying tribute goods to the country on behalf of the people and receiving compensation for it. In other words, since abalone doesn't come from this village, the defense tax agent gets abalone on their behalf and presents it to the country, then charges them for it. Naturally, they charge several times the market price. Officially, it's an act forbidden by the country, but as long as this absurd tribute goods system exists, it was an evil that couldn't disappear. There was a reason why this village was so impoverished. It's truly an evil practice that squeezes the people dry. The defense tax agent was taking huge profits from the people by using this ridiculous system, and the officials were again taking their bribes and maintaining the evil law. So this was truly a vicious cycle of political economic collusion in the Joseon Dynasty. After a period of silence, Yeonsan-gun slowly opened his mouth again. Who makes such an absurd decision to impose abalone as tribute goods on this mountain village? I heard that the country makes that decision. Don't the people here even protest properly? That's, if you complain about the country's decision, you're a traitor. In that moment, Yeonsan-gun's head seemed to spin. That was what he often said to his subjects. Moreover, did the signatures he had been scribbling and the seals he had been stamping haphazardly create such absurd policies? He had only chewed, tasted, and enjoyed the tribute goods coming up from the 8 provinces, but he didn't know where or how they were made. No, it was right to say that he didn't even care. I heard that the tribute goods coming up from each region represent the harvest of the 8 provinces of Joseon, but was that all nonsense? While Yeonsan-gun's head was in turmoil, he heard the unpleasant voice of the catfish mustache, raising his voice again. The defense tax money is one thing, but what about the other tribute goods? What are you talking about? The animal skins and medicinal herbs you offered as tribute goods last time were all useless, low-grade items and were rejected. The village chief's face turned white again. Rejection stamp. This word, which is still commonly used today, originated from the practice of stamping the character reject on tribute goods that were below standard and sending them back. This was called rejection stamp, and the local government's finance department had the sole authority to make that judgment. That means the local officials can reject tribute goods as they please before they are sent up to the court. Yeonsan-gun's expression hardened once again. The system for managing the quality of local specialties had become so corrupted that it had reached the point where they were arbitrarily rejecting anything that wasn't from a defense tax agent with whom they had a collusive relationship. Elder. Please give us a little more time. A bear appeared in the mountains yesterday, and Suni's father was seriously injured, so we can't get the tribute goods again right now. Ugh, I don't want to hear it. A bear? What kind of frozen bear are you talking about at a time like this? The catfish mustache ruthlessly brushed off the village chief, who was pleading and clinging to him, as if he were brushing off a bug. The village chief fell to the dirt floor, and his granddaughter rushed out in a hurry. Grandfather! You can't pay the defense tax, and you can't pay for the proper local specialties, so what are you going to do? Do you really need to be flogged by the government office to come to your senses? Elder. No, you can't. The granddaughter desperately shielded the village chief with her body. If the elderly man, who was already suffering from malnutrition because he couldn't eat properly, was flogged, he wouldn't survive. The catfish mustache's Li Bang, clerk, then wore a sinister expression and slowly began to reveal his true intentions. Then, as I said before, we'll have to take this house's granddaughter. If this child just serves night duty for the prefect, he said he'll make it all as if it never happened. Lee Bang, clerk, no. You can't do that. Ugh, shut up. The catfish mustache kicked the village chief, who was grabbing his leg and clinging to him. Then, he roughly grabbed the village chief's granddaughter's sleeve and dragged her away. The granddaughter shed tears like beads, but she let herself be dragged away without much resistance. No, it would be more accurate to say that she had already been deprived of the strength and will to resist. That son of a bitch. Gong-gil, who was watching this scene from inside the room, spat out an expletive and tried to get up, but Soo-hyuk, who was sitting across from him, reached out and stopped him. Have you forgotten that we are traveling incognito with the king? You must not move rashly. Soo-hyuk was also filled with anger, but as a bodyguard protecting the king on a secret mission, he couldn't rashly step forward, so he was trying his best to hold back. Ji-young was also frustrated by this unfair situation. What an absurd situation. What's worse, it's not the first time she's seen such a sight. Only the scale has become a little smaller, but isn't the same thing that Yeonsan-gun had been doing to women all over the country happening right in front of her eyes? Moreover, when you think about it, Ji-young herself had been forced into the palace in a similar way. Suddenly, the thought that the root cause of all this was that psycho-like king made her feel resentful. Since the king is like that, there's no way the subjects can be in their right minds. Ji-young turned around, wondering how Yeonsan-gun was taking this situation, but there was no one in the place where Yeonsan-gun had been sitting a moment ago. Ha! Ji-young looked around, and Yeonsan-gun was already bursting out of the room and running out into the yard. You piece of garbage! With a single scream, the village chief's eyes widened as if they would pop out. Yeonsan-gun, who had run out of the room, kicked the catfish mustache's Lee Bang, clerk, in the chest. Thwack! As the Lee Bang, clerk, who had been kicked nicely, rolled around on the dirt floor, Yeonsan-gun shouted in a voice full of anger. Why are you exploiting my people? He had a point, in his own way. If you had to interpret it, it would mean, why are you exploiting my, to be exploited by me, people? Or something like that. But to others, Yeonsan-gun, dressed in plain clothes, was not the king but a passing traveler. Such a person had suddenly kicked the local official who had come to collect the defense tax money and tribute goods. Even with the village chief next to him, frozen like ice with his mouth open, Yeonsan-gun's erratic behavior continued. He grabbed the catfish mustache by the collar, pulled him up, and then slapped him hard across the face. And how dare you talk about serving night duty? Smack, smack. As he continued to slap him until his anger was relieved, the catfish mustache, who had been grabbed by the collar, was foaming at the mouth and had fainted. And Ji-young, who was watching the scene, felt a strange mixture of catharsis and discomfort. What should I say? In modern times, they call this double standard. When you think about it, the extortion that had been happening right in front of her eyes was all something that Yeonsan-gun himself had been doing, but he couldn't stand it when others did it. Soon, the village chief, who had rushed to Yeonsan-gun, trembled and barely managed to speak. I am grateful for your help, but please leave this place quickly. If the government finds out, it will be a big problem. Leave? Why? When Yeonsan-gun asked back with a carefree face, as if he was about to take a nap, the village chief continued in a voice full of fear. The Chuncheon-do-Hobusa, prefect, who governs this area is not an ordinary cruel person. He never lets anyone who offends him in the slightest get away with it. Moreover, that person. The village chief pointed to the catfish mustache, who was foaming at the mouth and lying on the floor. That man is like the do-Hobusa, prefect's right-hand man. But you've made such a mess of him, so if the do-Hobusa, prefect, finds out, your bodies won't be safe. Leave quickly. Yeonsangun nodded casually as if he understood. Ah, then we can do this. I have a good idea. Yeonsan-gun, who turned to Shin Soo-hyuk, Dong-gil, and Ji-young in the room, smiled triumphantly as if he had come up with a brilliant plan. And from his mouth came words that were, as always, self-centered. Since it has come to this, we will strike the Dohobusa prefect's office. Pardon? That's the end of the web novel, Surviving as the Tyrant's Chef, Chapter 21, Chapter 30. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to ComicLingo to catch the upcoming parts.